Canto 25. The robber, when his words were ended, so made both the figs and lifted either fist, shouting, "There, God, for them at the eye throw." Then were the snakes my friends, for one gan twist and coiled itself around the sinner's throat, as if to say, "Now would I have thee wist." Another seized his arms and made a knot, clinching itself upon them in such wise he had no power to move them by a jot. Pistia, thou Pistia, shouldst devise to burn thyself to ashes, since thou hast outrun thy founders in iniquities. The blackest depths of hell through which I passed showed me no soul 'gainst God so filled with spite, no, not even he who down Thebes' wall was cast. He spake no further word, but turned to flight, and I beheld a centaur raging sore come shouting, "Of the ribald give me sight." I scarce believe Maremma yieldeth more snakes of all kinds than what composed the load which on his back, far as our form, he bore. Behind his nape, with pinions spread abroad, a dragon couchant on his shoulders lay, to set on fire whoever bars his road. "This one is Cacus," did my master say, who underneath the rock of Aventine watered a pool with blood day after day. Not with his brethren runs he in the line, because of yore the treacherous theft he wrought upon the neighboring wealthy herd of kine, whence to his crooked course an end was brought 'neath Hercules' club, which on him might shower down 100 blows. Ere 10 he suffered not. While this he said, the other had passed on, and under us 3 spirits forward pressed, of whom my guide and I had nothing known but that. "Who are ye?" they made loud request. Whereon our tale no further could proceed, and toward them wholly we our wits addressed. I recognized them not, but gave good heed, till, as it often haps in such a case, to name another, one discovered need, saying, "Now we're stopped Cyanpha in the race." Then, that my guide might halt and hearken well, on chin and nose I did my finger place. If, reader, to believe what now I tell thou shouldst be slow, I wonder not, for I who saw it all scarce find it credible. While I on them my brows kept lifted high, a serpent, which had 6 feet, suddenly flew at one of them and held him bodily. Its middle feet about his paunch it drew, and with the 2 in front his arms clutched fast, and bit one cheek and the other through and through. Its hinder feet upon his thighs it cast, thrusting its tail between them till behind, distended o'er his reins, it upward passed. The ivy to a tree could never bind itself so firmly as this dreadful beast its members with the others intertwined. Each lost the color that it once possessed, and closely they like heated wax unite, the former hue of neither manifest, even so up o'er papyrus when a light, before the flame there spreads a color done not black as yet, though from it dies the white. The other 2 meanwhile were looking on, crying, "Agnello, how art thou made new? Thou art not twain, and yet no longer one." A single head was molded out of 2, and on our sight a single face arose, which out of both lost countenances grew. 4 separate limbs did but 2 arms compose, belly with chest, and legs with thighs did grow to members such as not created shows. Their former fashion was all perished now, the perverse shape did both, yet neither seem, and thus transformed departed moving slow. And as the lizard, which at fierce extreme of dog-day heat another hedge would gain, flits, cross the path swift as the lightnings gleam right for the bellies of the other twain, a little snake quivering with anger sped, livid and black as is a pepper grain, and on the part by which we first are fed pierced one of them. And then upon the ground it fell before him and remained outspread. The wounded gazed on it but made no sound. Rooted he stood and yawning, scarce awake, as seized by fever or by sleep profound. It closely watched him, and he watched the snake, while from its mouth and from his wound gan swell volumes of smoke which joined one cloud to make, be Lucan henceforth dumb, nor longer tell of plagued Sabalus and Nasidius, but hearkening to what follows, mark it well. Silent be Ovid. Of him telling us how Cadmus to a snake, and to a fount changed Erytheus, I am not envious, for never of 2 natures front to front in metamorphosis, while mutually the forms their matter changed, he gives account. 'Twas thus that each to the other made reply. Its tail into a fork the serpent split, bracing his feet the other pulled them nigh, and then in one so thoroughly were knit his legs and thighs, no searching could divine at where the junction had been wrought in it. The shape, of which the one lost every sign, the cloven tail was taking. Then the skin of one grew rough, the other's soft and fine. I by the armpit saw the arms drawn in, and now the monster's feet, which had been small, what the others lost in length appeared to win. Together twisted, its hind feet did fall and grew the member men are used to hide, for his the wretch gained feet with which to crawl. Dyed in the smoke, they took on either side a novel color. Hair unwanted grew on one, the hair upon the other died. The one fell prone, erect the other drew, with cruel eyes continuing to glare, neath which their muzzles metamorphose new, the erect to his brows drew his. Of stuff to spare of what he upward pulled, there was no lack, so ears were formed on cheeks that erst were bare. Of that which clung in front nor was drawn back, superfluous, on the face was formed a nose, and lips absorbed the skin that still was slack. His muzzle who lay prone now forward goes, backward into his head his ears, he draws even as a snail appears its horns to lose. The tongue, which had been whole and ready was for speech, cleaves now, the forked tongue of the snake joins in the other, and the smoke has pause. The soul which thus a brutish form did take, along the valley, hissing, swiftly fled, the other close behind it spluttering spake, then, toward it turning his new shoulders, said unto the third, Now Buoso down the way may hasten crawling, as I earlier sped. Ballast which in the seventh balja lay thus saw I shift and change. Be my excuse the novel theme, if swerves my pen astray. And though these things mine eyesight might confuse a little, and my mind with fear divide, such secrecy they fleeing could not use, but that Puccio Sciencato plain I spied, and he alone of the companions three who came at first, was left unmodified. For the other, tears, Gavel, are shed by thee. Footnotes. The robber, etc. By means of his prophecy Fucci has, after a fashion, taken revenge on Dante for being found by him among the cheating thieves, instead of among the nobler sinners guilty of blood and violence. But in the rage of his wounded pride, he must insult even heaven, and this he does by using the most contemptuous gesture in an Italian's repertory. The fig is made by thrusting the thumb between the next two fingers. In the English a fig for him, we have a reference to the gesture. Pistia, the Pisties bore the reputation of being hard and pitiless. The tradition was that their city had been founded by such of Catiline's followers as survived his defeat on the Campo Paisno. It is no wonder, says Villani, I-32, that, being the descendants as they are of Catiline and his followers, the Pisties have always been ruthless and cruel to strangers and to one another. Who down Thebes' wall, Capanius Inf, Roman 14, 63. Maremma, C. Note Inf, Roman 13, 8. Cacus, Dante makes him a centaur, but Virgil Ean, Roman 8, only describes him as half-human. The pool was fed with the blood of his human victims. The herd was the spoil Hercules took from Geryon. In the Aeneid, Cacus defends himself from Hercules by vomiting a fiery smoke, and this doubtless suggested the dragon of the text. His brethren, the centaurs who guard the river of blood Inf, Roman 12, 56. In Fucci, as a sinner guilty of blood and violence above most of the thieves, the centaur Cacus takes a special malign interest. Our tale of Cacus. It is interrupted by the arrival of three sinners whom Dante does not at first recognize as he gazes down on them, but only when they begin to speak among themselves. They are three noble citizens of Florence, Agnello Brunelleschi, Buoso di Gliabati, and Puccio Sciencato de Gallegaiol, said to have pilfered in private life, or to have abused their tenure of high office by plundering the commonwealth. What is certainly known of them is that they were Florentine thieves of quality. Scienfa, another Florentine gentleman, one of the Donati. Since his companions lost sight of him, he has been transformed into a 6-footed serpent. Immediately appearing, he darts upon Agnello. On chin, etc., a gesture by which silence is requested. The mention of Scienfa shows Dante that he is among Florentines. Papyrus, the original is papiro, the word used in Dante's time for a wick made out of a reed like the papyrus, papayer being still the name for a wick in some dialects. Scardazzini. It cannot be shown that papiro was ever employed for paper in Italian. This, however, does not prove that Dante may not so use it in this instance, adopting it from the Latin papyrus. Besides, he says that the brown color travels up over the papiro, while it goes downward on a burning wick. Nor would the simile, if drawn from a slowly burning lampwick, agree with the speed of the change described in the text. A little snake. As transpires from the last line of the canto, this is Francesco, of the Florentine family of the Cavalcanti, to which Dante's friend Guido belonged. He wounds Buoso in the navel, and then, instead of growing into one new monster, as was the case with Scienfa and Agnello, they exchange shapes, and when the transformation is complete, Buoso is the serpent and Francesco is the human shade. Rooted he stood, etc. The description agrees with the symptoms of snakebite, one of which is extreme drowsiness. Sabalus and Nasidius were soldiers of Cato's army whose death by snakebite in the Libyan desert is described by Lucan, Pharsal. Roman 9, Sabalus was burned up by the poison, bones, and all. Nasidius swelled up and burst. Cadmus, Medem, Roman 4. Arethusa, Medem, v. The forms, etc. The word form is here to be taken in its scholastic sense of virtus formativa, the inherited power of modifying matter into an organized body. This, united to the divinely implanted spark of reason, says Philalethe's, constitutes, on Dante's system, a human soul. Even after death, this power continues to be an essential constituent of the soul and constructs out of the elements what seems to be a body. Here the sinners exchange the matter they have thus made their own, each retaining, however, his proper plastic energy as part of his soul. Dante in his Convito, Roman 3. 2 says that the human soul is the noblest form of all that are made under the heavens, receiving more of the divine nature than any other. The smoke has pause. The sinners have robbed one another of all they can lose. In the punishment is mirrored the sin that plunged them here. The novel theme, he has lingered longer than usual on this Balja, and pleads wonder of what he saw an excuse either of his prolixity or of some of the details of his description. The expression is perhaps one of feigned humility, to balance his recent boast of excelling Ovid and Lucan in inventive power. Gavel, the other, and the only one of those 5 Florentine thieves not yet named in the text, is he who came at first in the form of a little black snake, and who has now assumed the shape of Buoso. In reality, he is Francesco Cavalcanti, who was slain by the people of Gavel in the upper Valdarno. Many of them were in their turn slaughtered in revenge by the Cavalcanti and their associates. It should be remarked that some of these 5 Florentines were of one party, some of the other. It is also noteworthy that Dante recruits his thieves as he did his usurers from the great Florentine families, as the shifting and changing of this rubbish is apt to be found confusing. The following may be useful to some readers. There first came on the scene Agnello, Buoso, and Puccio. Cyanfa, in the shape of a 6-footed serpent, comes and throws himself on Agnello, and then, grown incorporate in a new strange monster. 2 in 1, they disappear. Buoso is next wounded by Francesco, and they exchange members and bodies. Only Puccio remains unchanged. Canto 26. Rejoice, O Florence, in thy widening fame. Thy wings thou beatest over land and sea, and even through Inferno spreads thy name. Burghers of thine, 5 such were found by me among the thieves, whence I ashamed grew, nor shall great glory thence redound to thee. But if teased toward the morning dreams are true, thou shalt experience ere long time be gone the doom even Prato prays for as thy due. And came it now, it would not come too soon. Would it were come as come it must with time, 'twill crush me more the older I am grown. Departing thence, my guide began to climb the jutting rocks by which we made descent some while ago, and pulled me after him. And as upon our lonely way we went, 'mong splinters of the cliff, the feet in vain, without the hand to help, had labor spent. I sorrowed, and am sorrow-smit again, recalling what before mine eyes there lay. And more than I am wont, my genius rein from running save where virtue leads the way, so that if happy star or holier might have gifted me, I never mourn it may. At time of year, when he who gives earth light his face shows to us longest visible, when gnats replace the fly at fall of night, not by the peasant resting on the hill are seen more fireflies in the vale below, where he perchance doth field and vineyard till, than flamelets I beheld resplendent glow throughout the whole 8th Balja, when at last I stood whence I the bottom plain could know. And as he whom the bears avenged, when passed from the earth Elijah, saw the chariot rise with horses heavenward reared and mounting fast, and no long time had traced it with his eyes till but a flash of light it all became, which like a rack of clouds swept to the skies, deep in the valley's gorge, in mode the same, these flitted. What it held by none was shown, and yet a sinner lurked in every flame. To see them well I from the bridge peered down, and if a jutting crag eye had not caught I must have fallen, though neither thrust nor thrown. My leader me beholding lost in thought, in all the fires are spirits, said to me, his flame round each is for a garment wrought. O master. I replied, by hearing the eye grow assured, but yet I knew before that thus indeed it was, and longed to be told who is in the flame which there doth soar, cloven, as if ascending from the pyre where with Ediocles there burned of yore his brother. He, Ulysses in that fire and Diomedes burn, in punishment thus held together, as they held in ire. And, wrapped within their flame, they now repent the ambush of the horse, which oped the door through which the Romans' noble seed forth went. For Gilde Damia makes deplore in death her lost Achilles, tears they shed and bear for the Palladium vengeance sore. Master, I pray thee fervently, I said, if from those flames they still can utter speech give ear as if 1,000 times I pled, refuse not here to linger, I beseech, until the cloven fire shall hither gain, thou seest how toward it eagerly I reach. And he, thy prayers are worthy to obtain exceeding praise, thou hast what thou dost seek, but see that thou from speech thy tongue refrain. I know what thou wouldst have. Leave me to speak, for they perchance would hear contemptuously shouldst thou address them, seeing they were Greek. Soon as the flame toward us had come so nigh that to my leader time and place seemed met, I heard him thus adjure it to reply, O ye who twain within one fire are set, if what I did your guerdon meriteth, if much or little ye are in my debt for the great verse I built while I had breath, by one of you be openly confessed where, lost to men, at last he met with death. Of the ancient flame, the more conspicuous crest murmuring began to waver up and down like flame that flickers, by the wind distressed. At length by it was measured motion shown, like tongue that moves in speech, and by the flame was language uttered thus. When I had gone from Circe, who a long year kept me tame beside her, ere the near Geta had received from Aeneas that new name, no softness for my son, nor reverence sad for my old father, nor the love I owed Penelope with which to make her glad, could quench the ardor that within me glowed a full experience of the world to gain of human vice and worth. But I abroad launched out upon the high and open main with but one bark, and but the little band which ne'er deserted me. As far as Spain I saw the seashore upon either hand, and as Morocco, saw Sardinia's isle, and all of which those waters wash the strand. I and my comrades were grown old the while and sluggish, ere we to the narrows came where Hercules of old did landmarks pile for sign to men they should no further aim, and Seville lay behind me on the right, as on the left lay Ceuta. Then to them I spake, O brothers, who through such a fight of 100,000 dangers west have won, in this short watch that ushers in the night of all your senses, ere your day be done, refuse not to obtain experience new of worlds unpeopled, yonder, past the sun. Consider whence the seed of life ye drew, ye were not born to live like brutish herd, but righteousness and wisdom to ensue. My comrades to such eagerness were stirred by this short speech the course to enter on, they had no longer brooked restraining word. Turning our poop, to where the morning shone we of the oars made wings for our mad flight, still tending left the further we had gone. And of the other pole I saw at night now all the stars, and 'neath the watery plain our own familiar heavens were lost to sight. 5 times afresh had kindled, and again the moon's face earthward was illumed no more. Since out we sailed upon the mighty main, then we beheld a lofty mountain soar, dim in the distance. Higher, as I thought, by far than any eye had seen before, we joyed, but with despair were soon distraught when burst a whirlwind from the new-found world and the forequarter of the vessel caught. With all the waters thrice it round was swirled, at the 4th time the poop, heaved upward, rose the prow, as pleased another, down was hurled, and then above us did the ocean close. Footnotes. Whence I ashamed, etc. There is here a sudden change from irony to earnest. 5 members of great Florentine families, eternally engaged among themselves in their shameful metamorphoses, nay, but it is too sad. Toward the morning, etc. There was a widespread belief in the greater truthfulness of dreams dreamed as the night wears away. See Perg, Roman 9, 13. The dream is Dante's foreboding of what is to happen to Florence. Of its truth he has no doubt, and the only question is how soon will it be answered by the fact. Soon, he says, if it is near to the morning that we dream true dreams, morning being the season of waking reality in which dreams are accomplished. Even Prato, a small neighboring city, much under the influence of Florence and somewhat oppressed by it. The commentators reckon up the disasters that afflicted Florence in the first years of the 14th century, between the date of Dante's journey and the time he wrote fires, falls of bridges, and civil strife. But such misfortunes were too much in keeping with the usual course of Florentine history to move Dante thus deeply in the retrospect. And as he speaks here in his own person, the soon is more naturally counted from the time at which he writes than from the date assigned by him to his pilgrimage. He is looking forward to the period when his own return in triumph to Florence was to be prepared by grievous national reverses, and, as a patriot, he feels that he cannot be wholly reconciled by his private advantage to the public misfortune. But it was all only a dream. Some while ago, see note inf, Roman 24, 79. Mong splinters, etc. They cross the wall or barrier between the 7th and 8th bulges. From inf, Roman 24. 63, we have learned that the rib of rock, on the line of which they are now proceeding, with its arches which overhang the various bulges, is rougher and worse to follow than that by which they began their passage towards the center of male bulge. Happy star, see note inf, Roman 15, 55. Dante seems to have been uncertain what credence to give to the claims of astrology. In a passage of the Purgatorio, Roman 16. 67, he tries to establish that whatever influence the stars may possess over us, we can never, except with our own consent, be influenced by them to evil. His sorrow here, as elsewhere, is not wholly a feeling of pity for the suffering shades, but is largely mingled with misgivings for himself. The punishment of those to whose sins he feels no inclination, he always beholds with equanimity. Here, as he looks down upon the false counselors and considers what temptations there are to misapply intellectual gifts, he is smitten with dread lest his lot should one day be cast in that dismal valley, and he find cause to regret that the talent of genius was ever committed to him. The memory even of what he saw makes him recollect himself and resolve to be wary. Then, as if to justify the claim to superior powers thus clearly implied, there comes a passage which in the original is of uncommon beauty. Field and vineyard. These lines, redolent of the sweet Tuscan midsummer gloaming, give us amid the horrors of Malebulge something like the breath of fresh air the peasant lingers to enjoy. It may be noted that in Italy the village is often found perched above the more fertile land, on a site originally chosen with a view to security from attack, so that here the peasant is at home from his labor. And yet a sinner, etc. The false counselors who for selfish ends hid their true minds and misused their intellectual light to lead others astray are forever hidden each in his own wandering flame. Eteocles, son of Oedipus and twin brother of Polynices. The brothers slew one another and were placed on the same funeral pile, the flame of which clove into two as if to image the discord that had existed between them. Theb. Roman 12. And Diomes, the two are associated in deeds of blood and guile at the siege of Troy. The Romans' noble seed. The trick of the wooden horse led to the capture of Troy, and that led Aeneas to wander forth on the adventures that ended in the settlement of the Trojans in Italy. Deidamia, that Achilles might be kept from joining the Greek expedition to Troy, he was sent by his mother to the court of Lycomedes, father of Deidamia. Ulysses lured him away from his hiding place and from Deidamia, whom he had made a mother. The Palladium, the Trojan sacred image of Pallas, stolen by Ulysses and Diomede Aen, Roman 2. Ulysses is here upon his own ground. They were Greek. Some find here an allusion to Dante's ignorance of the Greek language and literature, but Virgil addresses them in the Lombard dialect of Italian inf. Roman 27, 21. He acts as spokesman because those ancient Greeks were all so haughty that to a common modern mortal they would have nothing to say. He, as the author of the Aeneid, has a special claim on their good nature. It is but seldom that the shades are told who Virgil is, and never directly. Here Ulysses may infer it from the mention of the lofty verse. From Circe, it is Ulysses that speaks. The open main, the Mediterranean as distinguished from the Aegean, which ne'er deserted me, there seems no reason for supposing, with Philalides, that Ulysses is here represented as sailing on his last voyage from the island of Circe and not from Ithaca. Ulysses, on the contrary, represents himself as breaking away afresh from all the ties of home. According to Homer, Ulysses had lost all his companions ere he returned to Ithaca, and in the Odyssey Tiresias prophesies to him that his last wanderings are to be inland. But any acquaintance that Dante had with Homer can only have been vague and fragmentary. He may have founded his narrative of how Ulysses ended his days upon some floating legend, or, eager to fill up what he took to be a blank in the world of imagination, he may have drawn wholly on his own creative power. In any case, it is his Ulysses who, through the version of him given by a living poet, is most familiar to the English reader. The mighty main, the Atlantic Ocean. They bear to the left as they sail, till their course is due south, and crossing the equator, they find themselves under the strange skies of the southern hemisphere. For months they have seen no land. A lofty mountain. This is the mountain of purgatory, according to Dante's geography antipodal to Jerusalem, and the only land in the southern hemisphere. As pleased another, Ulysses is proudly resigned to the failure of his enterprise, for he was Greek. Canto 27. Now, having first erect and silent grown, for it would say no more, from us the flame, the poet sweet consenting, had moved on, and then our eyes were turned to one that came behind it on the way, by sounds that burst out of its crest in a confused stream. As the Sicilian bull, which bellowed first with his lamenting and it was but right who had prepared it with his tools accursed, roared with the howlings of the tortured wight, so that although constructed all of brass, yet seemed it pierced with anguish to the height. So, wanting road and vent by which to pass up through the flame, into the flame's own speech the woeful language all converted was. But when the words at length contrived to reach the top, while hither-thither shook the crest as moved the tongue at utterance of each, we heard, O thou, to whom are now addressed my words, who spakest now in Lombard phrase, depart, of the eye nothing more request. Though I be late arrived, yet of thy grace let it not irk thee here a while to stay. It irks not me, yet, as thou seest, I blaze. If lately to this world devoid of day from that sweet Latian land thou art come down whence all my guilt I bring, declare and say has now Romagna peace. Because my own native abode was in the mountain land, 'tween springs of Tiber and Urbino town. While I intent and bending low did stand, my leader, as he touched me on the side, speak thou, for he is Latian, gave command. Whereon without delay I thus replied, because already was my speech prepared. Soul, that down their dust and concealment bide, in thy Romagna wars have never spared and spare not now in tyrants' hearts to rage. But when I left it there was none declared. No change has fallen Ravenna for an age. There, covering Servia too with outspread wing, Polenta's eagle guards his heritage. Over the city which long suffering endured, and Frenchmen slain on Frenchmen rolled, the green paws once again protection fling. The mastiffs of Verrucchio, young and old, who to Montagna brought such evil cheer, still clinch their fangs where they were wont to hold. Cities, Lamon and Salerno near, the lion couched in white, are governed by which changes party with the changing year. And that to which the Savio wanders nigh as it is set, twixt mountain and champaign lives now in freedom now neath tyranny. But who thou art I to be told am fain be not more stubborn than we others found, as thou on earth illustrious wouldst remain. When first the fire a little while had moaned after its manner, next the pointed crest waved to and fro, then in this sense breath sound. If I believed my answer were addressed to one that earthward shall his course retrace, this flame should forthwith altogether rest. But since none ever yet out of this place returned alive, if all be true I hear, I yield the answer fearless of disgrace. I was a warrior, then a cordelier thinking thus girt to purge away my stain, and sure my hope had met with answer clear had not the high priest still with him remain, plunged me anew into my former sin, and why and how, I would to thee make plain. While I the frame of bones and flesh was in my mother gave me, all the deeds I wrought were fox-like, and in no wise leonine. Of every wile and hidden way I caught the secret trick, and used them with such sleight that all the world with fame of it was fraught. When I perceived I had attained quite the time of life when it behoves each one to furl his sails and coil his cordage tight, sorrowing for deeds I had with pleasure done, contrite and shriven, I religious grew. Ah, wretched me! And well it was begun, but for the chieftain of the Pharisees knew, then waging war hard by the Lateran, and not with Saracen nor yet with Jew, for Christian were his enemies every man, and none had at the siege of Acre been or trafficked in the empire of Soldan. His lofty office he held cheap, and an his sacred orders and the cord I wore, which used to make the wearers of it lean. As from Soracti Constantine of your Sylvester called to cure his leprosy, I as a leech was called this man before to cure him of his fever which ran high, my counsel he required, but I stood dumb, for drunken all his words appeared to be, he said. For fear be in thy heart no room, beforehand I absolve thee, but declare how Pelstrina I may overcome. Heaven I unlock, as thou art well aware, and close at will, because the keys are twin my predecessor was averse to bear. Then did his weighty reasoning on me win, till to be silent seemed the worst of all, and, Father, I replied, since from this sin thou dost absolve me into which I fall the scant performance of a promise wide will yield thee triumph in thy lofty stall. Francis came for me soon as ere I died, but one of the black cherubim was there, and take him not, nor rob me of him, cried, For him of right among my thralls I bear, because he offered counsel fraudulent, since when I've had him firmly by the hair. None is absolved unless he first repent, nor can repentance house with purpose ill, for this the contradiction doth prevent. Ah, wretched me! How did I shrinking thrill when clutching me he sneered. Perhaps of old thou didst not think I had in logic skill. He carried me to Minos. Minos rolled his tail 8 times round his hard back. In ire biting it fiercely, ere of me he told. Among the sinners of the shrouding fire, therefore am I, where thou beholdest, lost, and, sore at heart, go clothed in such attire. What he would say thus ended by the ghost. Away from us the moaning flame did glide while to, and fro its pointed horn was tossed. But we passed further on, I and my guide, along the cliff to where the arch is set o'er the next moat, where paying they reside, as schismatics who whelmed themselves in debt. Footnotes. Consenting, see line 21. One that came. This is the fire-enveloped shade of Guido of Montefeltro, the colloquy with whom occupies the whole of the canto. The Sicilian bull, Perillus, an Athenian, presented Phalaris, the tyrant of Agrigentum, with a brazen bull so constructed that when it was heated from below, the cries of the victim it contained were converted into the bellowing of a bull. The first trial of the invention was made upon the artist. Accursed not in the original. Rhyme in English hath such scarcity, as Chaucer says. As moved the tongue, etc. The shade being enclosed in the hollow fire, all his words are changed into a sound like the roaring of a flame. At last, when an opening has been worked through the crested point, the speech becomes articulate. Depart, etc. One at least of the words quoted as having been used by Virgil is Lombard. There is something very quaint in making him use the Lombard dialect of Dante's time. Tween springs, etc. Montefeltro lies between Urbino and the mountain where the Tiber has its source. Already, Dante knew that Virgil would refer to him for an answer to Guido's question, bearing as it did on modern Italian affairs. Romagna, the district of Italy lying on the Adriatic, south of the Po and east of Tuscany, of which Bologna and the cities named in the text were the principal towns. During the last quarter of the 13th century, it was the scene of constant wars promoted in the interest of the Church, which claimed Romagna as the gift of the Emperor Rudolph, and in that of the great nobles of the district, who while using the Guelph and Ghibelline war cries aimed at nothing but the lordship of the various cities. Foremost among these nobles was he with whose shade Dante speaks. Villani calls him the most sagacious and accomplished warrior of his time in Italy. Chronica, Roman 7. 80. He was possessed of lands of his own near Forli and Cesena, and was lord in turn of many of the Romagnese cities. On the whole, he appears to have remained true to his Ghibelline colors in spite of papal fulminations, although once and again he was reconciled to the Church, on the last occasion in 1294. In the years immediately before this, he had greatly distinguished himself as a wise governor and able general in the service of the Ghibelline Pisor, rather as the paid lord of it. Ravenna and the neighboring town of Servia were in 1300 under the lordship of members of the Polenta family, the father and brothers of the ill-fated Francesca Inf. V. Their arms were an eagle, half white on an azure and half red on a gold field. It was in the court of the generous Guido, son of one of these brothers, that Dante was to find his last refuge and to die. Over the city, etc. Forli. The reference is to one of the most brilliant feats of war performed by Guido of Montefeltro. Frenchmen formed great part of an army sent in 1282 against Forli by the Pope Martin Roman IV, himself a Frenchman. Guido, then lord of the city, led them into a trap and overthrew them with great slaughter. Like most men of his time, Guido was a believer in astrology, and is said on this occasion to have acted on the counsel of Guido Bonatti, mentioned among the diviners in the 4th Balgia Inf. Roman 20, 118. The Green Paws. In 1300, the Ordelaffi were lords of Forli. Their arms were a green lion on a gold ground. During the first years of his exile, Dante had to do with Scarpetta degli Ordelaffi, under whose command the exiled Florentines put themselves for a time, and there is even a tradition that he acted as his secretary. The Mastiffs of Verrucchio. Verrucchio was the castle of the Malatestas, lords of Rimini, called the Mastiffs on account of their cruel tenacity. The elder was the father of Francesca's husband and lover, the younger was a brother of these. Montagna. Montagna di Parsitati, one of a Ghibelline family that contested superiority in Rimini with the Guelph Malatestas, was taken prisoner by guile and committed by the old mastiff to the keeping of the young one, whose fangs were set in him to such purpose that he soon died in his dungeon. Cities, etc. Imola and Faenza, situated on the rivers named in the text. Maynardo Pagani, lord of these towns, had for arms an azure lion on a white field. During his minority, he was a ward of the Commonwealth of Florence. By his cunning and daring, he earned the name of the demon Purg. Roman 14, 118. He died at Imola in 1302 and was buried in the garb of a monk of Vallombrosa. Like most of his neighbors, he changed his party as often as his interest required. He was a Guelph in Florence and a Ghibelline in Romagna, say some. Savio, Cesena on the Savio, was distinguished among the cities of Romagna by being left more frequently than the others were to manage its own affairs. The Malatestas and Montefeltros were in turn possessed of the tyranny of it. But since, etc., the shades, being enveloped in fire, are unable to see those with whom they speak, and so Guido does not detect in Dante the signs of a living man, but takes him to be like himself a denizen of Inferno. He would not have the truth regarding his fate to be known in the world, where he is supposed to have departed life in the odor of sanctity. Dante's promise to refresh his fame he either regards as meaningless or as one made without the power of fulfilling it. Dante leaves him in his error, for he is there to learn all he can and not to bandy personal confessions with the shades. A Cordelier, in 1296 Guido entered the Franciscan order. He died in 1298, but where is not known. Some authorities say at Venice and others at Assisi. Benvenuto tells, he was often seen begging his bread in Ancona, where he was buried. Many good deeds are related of him, and I cherish a sweet hope that he may have been saved. The high priest, Boniface Roman 8. The Pharisees knew, the members of the court of Rome. Saint Jerome calls the dignified Roman clergy of his day the Senate of the Pharisees. For Christian, etc., the foes of Boniface, here spoken of, were the cardinals Peter and James Colonna. He destroyed their palace in Rome, 1297, and carried the war against them to their country seat at Pelstrina, the ancient Praenest, then a great stronghold. Dante here bitterly blames Boniface for instituting a crusade against Christians at a time when, by the recent loss of Acre, the gate of the Holy Land had been lost to Christendom. The Colonnas were innocent, too, of the crime of supplying the infidel with munitions of war, a crime condemned by the Lateran Council of 1215, and by Boniface himself, who excluded those guilty of it from the benefits of the Great Jubilee of 1300, which used, etc., in former times when the rule of the order was faithfully observed. Dante charges the Franciscans with degeneracy in the Paradiso, Zi 124. From Soracte, referring to the well-known legend. The fee for the cure was the fabulous donation, see Inf, Roman 19, 115. My predecessor, Celestine v. C. Inf, Roman 3, 60. The scant performance, etc., that Guido gave such counsel is related by a contemporary chronicler. The Pope said, "Tell me how to get the better of those mine enemies, thou who art so knowing in these things." Then he answered, "Promise much and perform little," which he did. But it seems odd that the wily and unscrupulous Boniface should have needed to put himself to school for such a simple lesson. Thou didst not think, etc. Guido had forgot that others could reason besides the Pope. With regard to the inefficacy of the papal absolution, an old commentator says, following Origen, the popes that walk in the footsteps of Peter have this power of binding and loosing, but only such as do so walk. But on Dante's scheme of what fixes the fate of the soul, absolution matters little to save, or priestly curses to damnify. See Purg, Roman 3, 133. It is unfeigned repentance that can help a sinner even at the last, and it is remarkable that in the case of Buoncamp, the gallant son of this same Guido, the infernal angel who comes for him as he expires complains that he has been cheated of his victim by one poor tear. See Purg. V88, etc. Why then is no indulgence shown in Dante's court to Guido, who might well have been placed in purgatory and made to have repented effectually of this his last sin? That Dante had any personal grudge against him we can hardly think. In the fourth book of the Convito, written, according to Fraticelli, in 1297, he calls him our most noble Guido Montefeltrano. and praises him as one of the wise and noble souls that refuse to run with full sails into the port of death, but furl the sails of their worldly undertakings, and, relinquishing all earthly pleasures and business, give themselves up in their old age to a religious life. Either, then, he sets Guido here in order that he may have a modern false counselor worthy to be ranked with Ulysses, or because, on longer experience, he had come to reprobate more keenly the abuse of the Franciscan habit, or, most likely of all, that he might, even at the cost of Guido, load the hated memory of Boniface with another reproach. Minus, here we have minus represented in the act of pronouncing judgment in words as well as by the figurative rolling of his tail around his body. Inf. V11. Canto 28. Could any, even in words unclogged by rhyme, recount the wounds that now I saw, and blood, although he aimed at it time after time? Here every tongue must fail of what it would, because our human speech and powers of thought to grasp so much come short in aptitude. If all the people were together brought who in Apulia, land distressed by fate, made lamentation for the bloodshed wrought by Rome, and in that war procrastinate when the large booty of the rings was won, as Livy writes, whose every word has weight, with those on whom such direful deeds were done when Robert Guiscard they as foes assailed, and those of whom still turns up many a bone at Separin, where each Apulian failed in faith, and those at Tagliacozzo strewed, where old Alardo, not by arms, prevailed. And each his wounds and mutilations showed, yet would they far behind by those be left who had the vile ninth Balja for abode. No casque, of middle stave or end bereft, ere gaped like one eye saw the rest among, slit from the chin all downward to the cleft. Between his legs, his entrails drooping hung, the pluck and that foul bag were evident which changes what is swallowed into dung. And while I gazed upon him all intent, opening his breast his eyes on me he set, saying, Behold, how by myself I'm rent. See how dismembered now is Mahomet? Ali in front of me goes weeping too, with visage from the chin to forelock split. By all the others whom thou seest there grew scandal and schism, while yet they breathed the day, because of which they now are cloven through. There stands behind a devil on the way, us with his sword thus cruelly to trim. He cleaves again each of our company as soon as we complete the circuit grim, because the wounds of each are healed outright, or ere anew he goes in front of him. But who art thou that peerest from the height? It may be putting off to reach the pain which shall the crimes confessed by thee requite. Death has not seized him yet, nor is he tanned to torment for his sins, my master said, but that he may a full experience gain, by me, a ghost, 'tis doomed he should be led down the infernal circles, round on round, and what I tell thee is the truth indeed. 100 shades and more, to whom the sound had reached, stood in the moat to mark me well, their pangs forgot. So did the words astound. Let Fra Dalson provide, thou mayst him tell thou, who perchance ere long shalt sunward go unless he soon would join me in this hell, much food, lest aided by the siege of snow the Novaries should o'er him victory get, which otherwise to win they would be slow. While this was said to me by Mahomet, one foot he held uplifted. To the ground he let it fall, and so he forward set next, one whose throat was gaping with a wound, whose nose up to the brows away was sheared, and on whose head a single ear was found. At me, with all the others, wondering peered, and, ere the rest, an open windpipe made, the outside of it all with crimson smeared. O thou, not here because of guilt, he said, and whom I sure on Latian ground did know unless by strong similitude betrayed. Upon peer de medicine bestow a thought, shouldst thou revisit the sweet plain that from Vercelli slopes to Marcabo, and make thou known to Fano's worthiest twain to Messer Guido, and to Angiolo they, unless foresight here be wholly vain, thrown overboard in gyve and manacle shall drown fast by Catolica, as planned by treachery of a tyrant fierce and fell. Between Majolica and Cyprus, strand a blacker crime did Neptune never spy by pirates wrought, or even by Argive's hand. The traitor who is blinded of an eye lord of the town which of my comrades one had been far happier ne'er to have come nigh, to parley with him will allure them on, then so provide, against Focara's blast no need for them of vow or orison. And I? Point out and tell, if wish thou haste to get news of thee to the world conveyed, who ruse that ere his eyes thereon were cast. On a companion's jaw his hand he laid, and shouted, while the mouth he open prized. 'Tis this one here by whom no word is said. He quenched all doubt in Caesar, and advised himself an outlaw that a man equipped for strife ran danger if he temporized. Alas, to look on, how downcast and hipped Curio, once bold in council, now appeared with gorge whence by the roots the tongue was ripped. Another one, whose hands away were sheared, in the dim air his stumps uplifted high so that his visage was with blood besmeared. And Mosca, too, remember, loud did cry, who said, ah me, a thing once done is done, an evil seed for all in Tuscany. I added, yea, and death to every one of thine. Whence he, woe piled on woe, his way went like a man with grief demented groan. But I to watch the gang made longer stay, and something saw which I should have a fear, without more proof, so much as even to say, but that my conscience bids me have good cheer the comrade leal whose friendship fortifies a man beneath the mail of purpose clear. I saw in sooth, still seems it, 'fore mine eyes, a headless trunk. With that sad company it forward moved, and on the self-same wise. The severed head, clutched by the hair, swung free down from the fist, yea, lantern-like hung down, staring at us it murmured. Wretched me! A lamp he made of head-piece once his own, and he was 2 in 1 and 1 in 2, but how to him who thus ordains is known. Arrived beneath the bridge and full in view, with outstretched arm his head he lifted high to bring his words well to us. These I knew. Consider well my grievous penalty, thou who, though still alive, art visiting the people dead. What pain with this convey? In order that to earth thou news mayst bring of me, that I'm Bertrand de Born Noel, who gave bad counsel to the younger king. I son and sire made each, gainst each rebel David and Absalom were fooled not more by counsels of the false Ahithophel. Kinsmen so close since I asunder tore, severed, alas. I carry now my brain from what it grew from in this trunk of yore, and so I prove the law of pain for pain. Footnotes. That now I saw, in the 9th Balja, on which he is looking down, and in which are punished the sowers of discord in church and state. Apulia, the southeastern district of Italy, owing to its situation a frequent battlefield in ancient and modern times. Rome, Trojans in most MSS. And then the Romans are described as descended from Trojans. The reference may be to the defeat of the Apulians with considerable slaughter by P. Decius Muse, or to their losses in general in the course of the Samnite War. War procrastinate. The Second Punic War lasted fully 15 years, and in the course of it, the Battle of Cannae was gained by Hannibal, where so many Roman knights fell that the spoil of rings amounted to a peck. Guiscard, one of the Norman conquerors of the regions which up to our own time constituted the Kingdom of Naples. In Apulia he did much fighting against Lombards, Saracens, and Greeks. He is found by Dante in Paradise among those who fought for the faith, par. Roman 18, 48. His death happened in Cephalonia in 1085, at the age of 70, when he was engaged on an expedition against Constantinople. Ceperin, in the swift and decisive campaign undertaken by Charles of Anjou against Manfred, King of Sicily and Naples, the first victory was obtained at Ceperano, but it was won owing to the treachery of Manfred's lieutenant, and not by the sword. The true battle was fought at Benevento, Perg. Roman 3, 128. Ceperano may be named by Dante as the field where the defeat of Manfred was virtually begun, and where the Apulians first failed in loyalty to their gallant king. Dante was a year old at the time of Manfred's overthrow, 1266. Tagliacozzo. The crown Charles had won from Manfred he had to defend against Manfred's nephew Conradin, grandson and last representative of Frederick Roman II, and the legitimate heir to the Kingdom of Sicily, whom, in 1268, he defeated near Tagliacozzo in the Abruzzi. He made his victory the more complete by acting on the advice of Alardo or Erard de Valery, an old crusader, to hold good part of his force in reserve. Charles wrote to the Pope that the slaughter was so great as far to exceed that at Benevento. The feet of all the low-born prisoners not slain on the field were cut off, while the gentlemen were beheaded or hanged. Mahomet. It has been objected to Dante by M. Littré that he treats Mahomet, the founder of a new religion, as a mere schismatic. The wonder would have been had he dwelt on the good qualities of the prophet at a time when Islam still threatened Europe. He goes on the fact that Mahomet and his followers rent great part of the east and south from Christendom, and for this the prophet is represented as being mutilated in a sorer degree than the other schismatics. Ali, son-in-law of Mahomet. Fra Dalsin. At the close of the 13th century, Boniface being pope, the general discontent with the corruption of the higher clergy found expression in the north of Italy in the foundation of a new sect, whose leader was Fra Dulcino. What he chiefly was enthusiast, reformer, or impostorate is impossible to ascertain. all we know of him being derived from writers in the papal interest. Among other crimes, he was charged with that of teaching the lawfulness of telling an inquisitor a lie to save your life, and with prophesying the advent of a pious pope. A holy war on a small scale was preached against him. After suffering the extremities of famine, snowed up as he was among the mountains, he was taken prisoner and cruelly put to death, 1307. It may have been in order to save himself from being suspected of sympathy with him, that Dante, whose hatred of Boniface and the new Pharisees was equal to Dulcino's, provides for him by anticipation a place with Mahomet. Pier de Medicina. Medicina is in the territory of Bologna. Piero is said to have stirred up dissensions between the Polentas of Ravenna and the Malatestas of Rimini. From Vercelli, etc. From the district of Vercelli to where the castle of Marcabo once stood at the mouth of the Po is a distance of 200 miles. The plain is Lombardy. Majolica, etc. On all the Mediterranean, from Cyprus in the east to Majorca in the west. The traitor, etc. The one-eyed traitor is Malatesta, lord of Rimini, the young mastiff of the preceding canto. He invited the two chief citizens of Fano, named in the text, to hold a conference with him, and procured that on their way they should be pitched overboard opposite the castle of Catolica, which stood between Fano and Rimini. This is said to have happened in 1304. Focara, the name of a promontory near Catolica, subject to squalls. The victims were never to double the headland. Curio, the Roman tribune who, according to Lucan, the incident is not historically correct, found Caesar hesitating whether to cross the Rubicon and advised him. Tol mores, semper nocuit differa parides. No delay, when men are ready they always suffer by putting off. The passage of the Rubicon was counted as the beginning of the Civil War. Curio gets scant justice, seeing that in Dante's view Caesar in all he did was only carrying out the divine purpose regarding the empire. Mosca, in 1215, one of the Florentine family of the Buondelmonti jilted a daughter of the Amidei. When these with their friends met to take counsel touching revenge for the insult, Mosca, one of the Uberti or of the Lamberti, gave his opinion in the proverb, cosa fatta ha capo. A thing once done is done with. The hint was approved of, and on the following Easter morning, the young Buondelmont, as, mounted on a white steed and dressed in white he rode across the Ponte Vecchio, was dragged to the ground and cruelly slain. All the great Florentine families took sides in the feud, and it soon widened into the civil war between Florentine Guelph and Ghibelline. Bertrand de Born is mentioned by Dante in his treatise De Vulgari Eloquio, Roman 2. 2, especially the poet of warlike deeds. He was a Gascon noble who used his poetical gift very much to stir up strife. For patron he had the Prince Henry, son of Henry Roman 2, of England. Though Henry never came to the throne, he was, during his father's lifetime, crowned as his successor and was known as the young king. After the death of the prince, Bertrand was taken prisoner by the king, and according to the legend, was loaded with favors because he had been so true a friend to his young master. That he had a turn for fomenting discord is shown by his having also led a revolt in Aquitaine against Richard Eyal the Old MSS. And all the earlier commentators read Re Giovanni, King John, Re Giovane, the young king, being a comparatively modern emendation. In favor of adopting this, it may be mentioned that in his poems Bertrand calls Prince Henry Lo Res Joves, the young king, that it was Henry and not John that was his friend and patron, and that in the old cento novelle Henry is described as the young king. In favor of the older reading, that John as well as his brother was a rebel to Henry, and that the line is hurt by the change from Giovanni to Giovane. Considering that Dante almost certainly wrote Giovanni, it seems most reasonable to suppose that he may have confounded the Re Giovane with King John. From what etc., the spinal cord, as we should now say, though Dante may have meant the heart. Pain for pain. In the city of Dis we found the heresiarchs, those who lead others to think falsely. The lower depth of the male bulge is reserved for such as needlessly rend any divinely constituted order of society, civil, or religious. Conduct counts more with Dante than opinion in this case. Canto 29. The many folk and wounds of divers kind had flushed mine eyes and set them on the flow, till I to weep and linger had a mind. But Virgil said to me, why gazing so? Why still thy vision fastening on the crew of dismal shades dismembered there below? Thou didst not thus the other bulges view? Think, if to count them be thine enterprise, the valley circles 20 miles and 2. Beneath our feet the moon already lies, the time wears fast away to us decreed, and greater things than these await thine eyes. I answered swift, hadst thou but given heed to why it was my looks were downward bent, to yet more stay thou mightest have agreed. My guide meanwhile was moving, and I went behind him and continued to reply, adding, within the moat on which intent I now was gazing with such eager eye I trow a spirit weeps, one of my kin, the crime whose guilt is rated there so high. Then said the master, henceforth hold thou in thy thoughts from wandering to him. New things claim attention now, so leave him with his sin. Him saw I at thee from the bridge foot aim a threatening finger, while he made thee known, Jerry del Bello heard I named his name. But at the time thou wast with him alone engrossed who once held Hautefort, nor the place didst look at where he was, so passed he on. O leader mine, death violent and base, and not avenged as yet, I made reply, by any of his partners in disgrace, made him disdainful, therefore went he by and spake not with me, if I judge aright, which does the more my ruth intensify. So we conversed, till from the cliff we might of the next valley have had prospect good down to the bottom, with but clearer light. When we above the inmost cloister stood of male bulge, and discerned the crew of such as there compose the brotherhood, so many lamentations pierced me through, and barbed with pity, all the shafts were sped my open palms across my ears I drew. From Valdichiana's every spittle bed all ailments to September from July, with all in Maremma and Sardinia bred, heaped in one pit a sickness might supply like what was here. And from it rose a stink like that which comes from limbs that putrefy. Then we descended by the utmost brink of the long ridge leftward, once more we fell until my vision, quickened now, could sink deeper to where justice infallible, the minister of the Almighty Lord, chastises forgers doomed on earth to hell. Aegina could no sadder sight afford, as I believe, when all the people ailed and all the air was so with sickness stored, down to the very worms creation failed and died, whereon the pristine folk once more, as by the poets is for certain held, from seed of ants their family did restore. Then what was offered by that valley black with plague-struck spirits heaped upon the floor. Supine some lay, each on the other's back or stomach, and some crawled with crouching gait for change of place along the doleful track. Speechless we moved with step deliberate, with eyes and ears on those disease, crushed down nor left them power to lift their bodies straight. I saw two sit, shoulder to shoulder thrown as plate holds plate up to be warmed, from head down to the feet with scurf and scab o'ergrown. Nor ever saw I currycomb so plied by varlet with his master standing by, or by one kept unwillingly from bed, as I saw each of these his scratchers ply upon himself. For naught else now avails against the itch which plagues them furiously. The scab they tore and loosened with their nails, as with a knife men use the bream to strip, or any other fish with larger scales. Thou, that thy mail dost with thy fingers rip, my guide to one of them began to say, and sometimes dost with them as pincers nip tell, is there any here from Italy among you all, so may thy nails suffice for this their work to all eternity. Latians are both of us in this disguise of wretchedness, weeping said one of those, but who art thou, demanding on this wise? My guide made answer, I am one who goes down with this living man from steep to steep that I to him Inferno may disclose. Then broke their mutual prop, trembling with deep amazement each turned to me, with the rest to whom his words had echoed in the heap, me the good master cordially addressed, whate'er thou hast a mind to ask them, say. And since he wished it, thus I made request, so may remembrance of you not decay within the upper world out of the mind of men, but flourish still for many a day, as ye shall tell your names and what your kind, let not your vile, disgusting punishment to full confession make you disinclined. An Aretine, I to the stake was sent by Albert of Siena, one confessed, but came not here through that for which I went to death. 'Tis true I told him all in jest, I through the air could float in upward gyre, and he, inquisitive and dull at best, did full instruction in the art require, I could not make him Daedalus, so then his second father sent me to the fire. But to the deepest bulger of the 10, for alchemy which in the world I wrought, the unerring Minos doomed me. Now were men e'er found, I of the poet asked, so fraught with vanity as are the Sienese, French vanity to theirs is surely naught. The other leper hearing me, to these my words. Omit the Stricca, Swift did shout, who knew his tastes with temperance to please, and Nicholas, who earliest found out the lavish custom of the clove-stuffed roast within the garden where such seed doth sprout, nor count the club where Caxia D, Esseian lost vineyards and woods, mid whom away did throw his wit the Abigliato. But whose ghost it is, that thou mayst weet, that backs thee so against the Sienese, make sharp thine eyes that thou my countenance mayst surely know. In me Capacchio's shade thou'lt recognize, who forged false coin by means of alchemy. Thou must remember, if I well surmise, how I of nature very ape could be. Footnotes. Thou didst not, etc. It is a noteworthy feature in the conduct of the poem that when Dante has once gained sufficient knowledge of any group in the Inferno, he at once detaches his mind from it, and, carrying on as little a rear of pity as he can, gives his thoughts to further progress on the journey. The departure here made from his usual behavior is presently accounted for. Virgil knows why he lingers, but will not seem to approve of the cause. 20 miles and 2. The ninth Balja has a circumference of 22 miles, and as the procession of the shades is slow, it would indeed involve a protracted halt to wait till all had passed beneath the bridge. Virgil asks ironically if he wishes to count them all. This precise detail, taken along with one of the same kind in the following canto, line 86, has suggested the attempt to construct the Inferno to a scale. Dante wisely suffers us to forget, if we will, that taking the diameter of the earth at 6,500 miles, as given by him in the Convito, he travels from the surface of the globe to the center at the rate of more than 2 miles a minute, counting downward motion alone. It is only when he has come to the lowest rings that he allows himself to give details of size, and probably the mention of the extent of the ninth Balja, which comes on the reader as a surprise, is thrown out in order to impress on the imagination some sense of the enormous extent of the regions through which the pilgrim has already passed. Henceforth, he deals in exact measurement. The moon, it is now some time after noon on the Saturday. The last indication of time was at Canto 21, 112. The time, etc. Before nightfall, they are to complete their exploration of the Inferno, and they will have spent 24 hours in it. Jerry del Bello, one of the Alighieri, a full cousin of Dante's father. He was guilty of encouraging dissension, say the commentators, which is to be clearly inferred from the place assigned him in Inferno, but they do not agree as to how he met his death, nor do they mention the date of it. Not avenged till 30 years after, says Landino, but does not say if this was after his death or the time at which Dante writes. Haudefort, Bertrand de Born's castle in Gascony. My Ruth, enlightened moralist though Dante is, he yet shows himself man of his age enough to be keenly alive to the extremest claims of kindred. And while he condemns the vendetta by the words put into Virgil's mouth, he confesses to a feeling of meanness not to have practiced it on behoof of a distant relative. There is a high art in this introduction of Jerry del Bello. Had they conferred together, Dante must have seemed either cruel or pusillanimous, reproaching or being reproached. As it is, all the poetry of the situation comes out the stronger that they do not meet face to face. The threatening finger, the questions hastily put to Jerry by the astonished shades, and his disappearance under the dark vault, when by the law of his punishment the sinner can no longer tarry. With but clearer light, they have crossed the rampart dividing the ninth Balja from the 10th, of which they would now command a view, were it not so dark. The brotherhood, the word used properly describes the lay brothers of a monastery. Philalethes suggests that Dante may regard the devils as the true monks of the monastery of Maelbalge. The simile involves no contempt for the monastic life, but is naturally used with reference to those who live secluded and under a fixed rule. He elsewhere speaks of the college of the hypocrites Inf. Roman 23, 91, and of paradise as the cloister where Christ is abbot Purg. Roman 26, 129. Valdichiana, the district lying between Arezzo and Chiusi, in Dante's time a hotbed of malaria, but now, owing to drainage works promoted by the enlightened Tuscan minister Fossombroni, 1823, one of the most fertile and healthy regions of Italy. Sardinia had in the Middle Ages an evil reputation for its fever-stricken air. The Maremma has been already mentioned Inf. Roman 25, 19. In Dante's time, it was almost unpeopled. The long ridge, one of the ribs of rock which, like the spokes of a wheel, ran from the periphery to the center of Maelbalge, rising into arches as they crossed each successive Balja. The utmost brink is the inner bank of the 10th and last Balja. To the edge of this moat they descend, bearing as usual to the left hand. Doomed on earth, etc., whom she here registers. While they are still on earth, their doom is fixed by divine justice. Aegina, the description is taken from Ovid Medem, Romans 7. The scab, etc. As if by an infernal alchemy, the matter of the shadowy bodies of these sinners is changed into one loathsome form or another. To all eternity. This may seem a stroke of sarcasm, but is not. Himself a shade, Virgil cannot, like Dante, promise to refresh the memory of the shades on earth, and can only wish for them some slight alleviation of their suffering. An Aretine, called Griffolino, and burned at Florence or Siena on a charge of heresy. Albert of Siena is said to have been a relative, some say the natural son, of the Bishop of Siena. A man of the name figures as hero in some of Sacchetti's novels, always in a ridiculous light. There seems to be no authentic testimony regarding the incident in the text. Daedalus, who escaped on wings of his invention from the Cretan labyrinth he had made and lost himself in. The Sienese, the comparison of these to the French would have the more cogency as Siena boasted of having been founded by the Gauls. That vain people, says Dante of the Sienese in the Purgatory, Roman 13, 151. Among their neighbors they still bear the reputation of lightheadedness. Also, it ought to be added, of great urbanity. The Strica, the exception in his favor is ironical, as is that of all the others mentioned. Nicholas, the lavish custom of the clove, which he invented, is variously described. I have chosen the version which makes it consist of stuffing pheasants with cloves, then very costly. The club, the commentators tell that the two young Sienese nobles above mentioned were members of a society formed for the purpose of living luxuriously together. 12 of them contributed a fund of above 200,000 gold florins. They built a great palace and furnished it magnificently, and launched out into every other sort of extravagance with such assiduity that in a few months their capital was gone. As that amounted to more than 100,000 pounds of our money, equal in those days to 1,000,000 or two, the story must be held to savor of romance. That Dante refers to a prodigal's club that actually existed some time before he wrote we cannot doubt. But it seems uncertain, to say the least, whether the sonnets addressed by the Tuscan poet Folgore de Gemignane to a jovial crew in Siena can be taken as having been inspired by the club Dante speaks of. A translation of them is given by Mr. Rossetti in his Circle of Dante. See Mr. Symonds's Renaissance, volume Roman 4, page 54, note, for doubts as to the date of Folgore. Caxia D. Essien, whose short and merry club life cost him his estates near Siena. The Abigliato, nothing is known, though a great deal is guessed, about this member of the club. It is enough to know that, having a scant supply of wit, he spent it freely. Capaccio, someone whom Dante knew, whether he was a Florentine or a Sienese is not ascertained, but from the strain of his mention of the Sienese we may guess Florentine. He was burned in Siena in 1293. Scardazzini. They had studied together, says the Anonimo. Benvenuto tells of him that one Good Friday, while in a cloister, he painted on his nail with marvelous completeness a picture of the crucifixion. Dante came up and was lost in wonder, when Capaccio suddenly licked his nail clean, which may be taken for what it is worth. Canto 30. Because of Semele, when Juno's ire was fierce, gainst all that were to Thebes allied, as had been proved by many an instance dire, so mad grew Athamas that when he spied his wife as she with children twain drew near, each hand by one encumbered, loud he cried, "Be now the nets outspread, that I may snare cubs with the lioness at yon straight ground." And stretching claws of all compassion bare, he on Learchus seized and swung him round, and shattered him upon a flinty stone. Then she herself and the other burden drowned. And when by fortune was all overthrown the Trojans' pride, inordinate before monarch and kingdom, equally undone Hecuba, sad and captive, mourning o'er Polyxena, when dolorous she beheld the body of her darling Polydore upon the coast, out of her wits she yelled, and spent herself in barking like a hound, so by her sorrow was her reason quelled. But never yet was Trojan fury found, nor that of Thebes, to sting so cruelly brute beasts, far less the human form to wound as two pale naked shades were stung, whom I saw biting run, like swine when they escape famished and eager from the empty sty. Capaccio coming up to, in his nape one fixed his fangs, and hauling at him made his belly on the stony pavement scrape. The Aretine who stood, still trembling, said, "That imp is Gianni Scicchi, and he goes rabid, thus trimming others." Oh. I prayed, so may the teeth of the other one of those not meet in thee, as ere she pass from sight, thou freely shalt the name of her disclose. And he to me, that is the ancient sprite of shameless Mirha, who let liking rise for him who got her, past all bounds of right. As to transgress with him, she in disguise came near to him deception to maintain. So he, departing yonder from our eyes, that he the lady of the herd might gain, bequeathed his goods by formal testament, while he buoso donates form did feign. And when the rabid couple from us went, who all this time by me were being eyed, upon the rest ill-starred I grew intent, and, fashioned like a lute, I one espied, had he been only severed at the place where at the groin men's lower limbs divide. The grievous dropsy, swollen with humour's base, which every part of true proportion strips till paunch grows out of keeping with the face, compelled him widely ope to hold his lips like one in fever who, by thirst possessed, has one drawn up while the other chinward slips. O ye, who by no punishment distressed, nor know I why, are in this world of duel, he said. A while let your attention rest on Master Adam here of misery full. Living, I all I wished enjoyed at will, now lust I for a drop of water cool. The water brooks that down each grassy hill of Casentino to the Arno fall, and with cool moisture all their courses fill always, and not in vain, I see them all, because the vision of them dries me more than the disease, neath which my face grows small. For rigid justice, me chastising sore, can in the place I sinned at motive find to swell the size in which I now deplore. There lies Romna, whereof the money coined with the Baptist's image I made counterfeit, and therefore left my body burnt behind. But could I see here Guido's wretched sprite, or Alexander's, or their brothers, I for Font Branda would not give the sight. One is already here, unless they lie mad souls with power to wander through the crowd. What boots it me, whose limbs diseases tie? But were I yet so nimble that I could creep 1 poor inch a century, some while ago had I begun to take the road searching for him among this people vile, and that although 11 miles 'tis long, and has a width of more than half a mile. Because of them am I in such a throng, for to forge florins I by them was led, which by 3 carats of alloy were wrong. Who are the wretches twain, I to him said, who smoke like hand in wintertime fresh brought from water, on thy right together spread? Here found I them, nor have they budged a jot, he said, since I was hurled into this vale, and, as I deem, eternally they'll not. One with false charges Joseph did assail, false Sinon, Greek from Troy, is the other white. Burning with fever they this stink exhale. Then one of them, perchance o'ercome with spite because he thus contemptuously was named, smote with his fist upon the belly tight. It sounded like a drum, and then was aimed a blow by Master Adam at his face with arm no whit less hard, while he exclaimed, "What though I can no longer shift my place because my members by disease are weighed, I have an arm still free for such a case." To which was answered, "When thou wast conveyed unto the fire, 'twas not thus good at need, but even more so when the coiner's trade was plied by thee. The swollen one, true indeed. But thou didst not bear witness half so true when Trojans at thee for the truth did plead. If I spake falsely, thou didst oft renew false coin," said Sinon. "One fault brought me here, thee more than any devil of the crew. Bethink thee of the horse, thou perjurer," he of the swollen paunch answered, "and that by all men 'tis known should anguish in thee stir. Be thirst that cracks thy tongue thy penalty, and putrid water," so the Greek replied, "which for thine eyes thy stomach moundeth high. The coiner then, thy mouth thou openest wide, as thou art used thy slanderous words to vent, but if I thirst and humours plump my hide thy head throbs with the fire within thee pent, to lap Narcissus' mirror, to implore and urge thee on would need no argument." While I to hear them did attentive poor my master said, "Thy fill of staring take, to rouse my anger needs but little more." And when I heard that he in anger spake toward him, I turned with such a shame inspired, recalled, it seems afresh on me to break. And, as the man who dreams of hurt is fired with wish that he might know his dream a dream, and so what is, as 'twere not, is desired, so I, struck dumb and filled with an extreme craving to find excuse, unwittingly the meanwhile made the apology supreme. "Less shame," my master said, "would nullify a greater fault, for greater guilt atone, all sadness for it, therefore, lay thou by, but bear in mind that thou art not alone. If fortune hap again to bring thee near where people such debate are carrying on, to things like these 'tis shame to lend an ear." Footnotes. Semele, the daughter of Cadmus, founder and king of Thebes, was beloved by Jupiter and therefore hated by Juno, who induced her to court destruction by urging the god to visit her, as he was used to come to Juno, in all his glory. And in other instances the goddess took revenge, Ovid medem, Roman 4. Athamas, married to a sister of Semele, was made insane by the angry Juno, with the result described in the text. Hecuba, wife of Priam, king of Troy and mother of Polyxena and Polydorus. While she was lamenting the death of her daughter, slain as an offering on the tomb of Achilles, she found the corpse of her son, slain by the king of Thrace, to whose keeping she had committed him, Ovid medem, Roman 13. Trojan fury, etc. It was by the agency of a fury that Athamas was put out of his mind. But the Trojan and Theban furies here meant are the frenzies of Athamas and Hecuba, wild with which one of them slew his son, and the other scratched out the eyes of the Thracian king. Capaccio, see close of the preceding canto. Here as elsewhere sinners are made ministers of vengeance on one another. The Aretine, Griffolino who boasted he could fly, already represented as trembling inf. Roman 29, 97. Giovanni Schicai, one of the Cavalcanti of Florence. Mirha, this is a striking example of Dante's detestation of what may be called heartless sins. It is covered by the classification of Canto 11. Yet it is almost with a shock that we find Mirha here for personation, and not rather condemned to some other circle for another sin. Buoso Donati, introduced as a thief in the 7th Balgia inf. Roman 25, 140. Buoso was possessed of a peerless mare, known as the Lady of the Herd. To make some amends for his unscrupulous acquisition of wealth, he made a will bequeathing legacies to various religious communities. When he died, his nephew, Simon, kept the fact concealed long enough to procure a personation of him as if on his deathbed by Giovanni Schicai, who had great powers of mimicry. Acting in the character of Buoso, the rogue professed his wish to make a new disposition of his means, and after specifying some trifling charitable bequests the better to maintain his assumed character, named Simon as general legatee and bequeathed Buoso's mare to himself. O ye, etc. The speaker has heard and noted Virgil's words of explanation given in the previous canto, line 94. Master Adam of Brescia, an accomplished worker in metals, was induced by the Counts Guidi of Romna in the Casentino, the upland district of the Upper Arno, to counterfeit the gold coin of Florence. This false coin is mentioned in a chronicle as having been in circulation in 1281. It must therefore have been somewhat later that Master Adam was burned, as he was by sentence of the Republic, upon the road which led from Romna to Florence. A cairn still existing near the ruined castle bears the name of the dead man's cairn. The money coined, etc., the gold florin, afterwards adopted in so many countries, was first struck in 1252, which florins weighed 8 to the ounce and bore the lily on the one side and on the other St. John. Villani, Roman 6, 54. The piece was thus of about the weight of our half-sovereign. The gold was of 24 carats, that is, it had no alloy. The coin soon passed into wide circulation, and to maintain its purity became for the Florentines a matter of the first importance. Villani, in the chapter above cited, tells how the king of Tunis, finding the florin to be of pure gold, sent for some of the Pisans, then the chief traders in his ports, and asked who were the Florentines that they coined such money. Only our Arabs, was the answer, meaning that they were rough country folk, dependent on Pisa. Then what is your coin like? He asked. A Florentine of Oltrarno named Piero Balducci, who was present, took the opportunity of informing him how great Florence was compared with Pisa, as was shown by that city having no gold coinage of its own. Whereupon the king made the Florentines free of Tunis and allowed them to have a factory there. And this, adds Villani, who had himself been agent abroad for a great Florentine house of business, we had it first-hand from the aforesaid Piero, a man worthy of credit, and with whom we were associated in the priorate. Guido, etc. The Guidi of Romna were a branch of the great family of the Counts Guidi. The father of the 3 brothers in the text was grandson of the old Guido that married the good Gualdrada, and cousin of the Guidigera met by Dante in the 7th circle inf. Roman 16, 38. How the 3rd brother was called is not settled, nor which of the 3 was already dead in the beginning of 1300. The Alexander of Romna, who for some time was captain of the banished Florentine whites, was most probably he of the text. A letter is extant professing to be written by Dante to 2 of Alexander's nephews on the occasion of his death. in which the poet excuses himself for absence from the funeral on the plea of poverty. By the time he wrote the Inferno, he may, owing to their shifty politics, have lost all liking for the family. Yet it seems harsh measure that is here dealt to former friends and patrons. Font Branda, a celebrated fountain in the city of Siena. Near Romna is a spring which is also named Font Branda, and this, according to the view now most in favor, was meant by Master Adam. But was it so named in Dante's time? Or was it not so called only when the comedy had begun to awaken a natural interest in the old coiner, which local ingenuity did its best to meet? The early commentators know nothing of the Casentino Font Branda, and though it is found mentioned under the date of 1539, that does not take us far enough back. In favor of the Sienese fountain is the consideration that it was the richest of any in the Tuscan cities, that it was a great architectural as well as engineering work, and that, although now more than half a century old, it was still the subject of curiosity with people far and near. Besides, Adam has already recalled the brooks of Casentino, and so the mention of the paltry spring at Romna would introduce no fresh idea like that of the abundant waters of the great fountain, which daily quenched the thirst of thousands. 11 miles. It will be remembered that the previous Balja was 22 miles in circumference. 3 carats in 24 being of some foreign substance. Who smoke, etc. This description of sufferers from high fever, like that of Master Adam with his tympanitis, has the merit, such as it is, of being true to the life. 1 etc. Potiphar's wife. Sinon, called of Troy, as being known through his conduct at the siege. He pretended to have deserted from the Greeks, and by a false story persuaded the Trojans to admit the fatal wooden horse. When Trojans, etc. When King Priam sought to know for what purpose the wooden horse was really constructed. Narcissus mirror, the pool in which Narcissus saw his form reflected. 'Tis shame. Dante knows that Virgil would have scorned to portray such a scene of low life as this, but he must allow himself a wider license, and here as elsewhere refuses nothing, even in the way of mean detail, calculated to convey to his readers a full experience of the Inferno, as he conceived of it the place, where all the vileness of the world is cast. Canto 31. The very tongue that first had caused me pain, biting till both my cheeks were crimsoned o'er, with healing medicine me restored again. So have I heard, the lance Achilles bore, which earlier was his father's, first would wound and then to health the wounded part restore. From that sad valley, we our backs turned round, up the encircling rampart making way nor uttering, as we crossed it, any sound. Here was it less than night and less than day, and scarce I saw at all what lay ahead, but of a trumpet the sonorous bray no thunderpeal were heard beside it led mine eyes along the line by which it passed, till on one spot their gaze concentrated. When by the dolorous route was overcast the sacred enterprise of Charlemagne Roland blew not so terrible a blast. Short time my head was that way turned, when plain I many lofty towers appeared to see. Master, what town is this? I asked. Since fain thou art, he said, to pierce the obscurity while yet through distance, 'tis inscrutable, thou must of error needs the victim be. Arriving there thou shalt distinguish well how much by distance was thy sense betrayed, therefore to swifter course thyself compel. Then tenderly he took my hand and said, ere we pass further I would have thee know, that at the fact thou mayst be less dismayed. These are not towers but giants, in a row set round the brink each in the pit abides, his navel hidden and the parts below. And even as when the veil of mist divides little by little dawns upon the sight what the obscuring vapor earlier hides, so, piercing the gross air uncheered by light, as I step after step drew near the bound my error fled, but I was filled with fright. As Monterregan with towers is crowned which from the walls encircling it arise, so, rising from the pit's encircling mound, half of their bodies towered before mine eyes dread giants, still by Jupiter defied from heaven whene'er it thunders in the skies. The face of one already I descried, his shoulders, breast, and down his belly far, and both his arms dependent by his side. When nature sees such creatures as these are to form, she of a surety wisely wrought resting from Mars such ministers of war. And though she rue not that to life she brought the whale and elephant, who deep shall read will justify her wisdom in his thought, for when the powers of intellect are wed to strength and evil will, with them made one, the race of man is helpless left indeed. As large and long as is St. Peter's cone at Rome, the face appeared. Of every limb on scale like this was fashioned every bone. So that the bank, which covered half of him as might a tunic, left uncovered yet so much that if to his hair they sought to climb 3 Frisians end on end, their match had met, for 30 great palms eye of him could see, counting from where a man's cloak clasp is set. Rayful my amich zabai almi, out of the bestial mouth began to roll, which scarce would suit more dulcet psalmody, and then my leader charged him. Stupid soul, stick to thy horn. With it relieve thy mind when rage or other passions pass control. Feel at thy neck, round which the thong is twined, O puzzle-headed wretch, from which 'tis slung, clipping thy monstrous breast thou shalt it find. And then to me? From his own mouth is wrung proof of his guilt. Tease Nimrod, whose insane whim hindered men from speaking in one tongue. Leave we him here nor spend our speech in vain, for words to him in any language said, as unto others his, no sense contain. Turned to the left, we on our journey sped, and at the distance of an arrow's flight we found another huger and more dread. By what artificer thus pinion tight I cannot tell, but his left arm was bound in front, as at his back was bound the right, by a chain which girt him firmly round and round, about what of his frame there was displayed below the neck, in fivefold gyre 'twas wound. Incited by ambition, this one made trial of prowess gainst Almighty Jove, my leader told, and he is thus repaid. 'Tis Ephialtes, mightily who strove what time the giants to the gods caused fright. The arms he wielded then no more will move, and I to him. Fain would I, if I might, on the enormous Briareus set I, and know the truth by holding him in sight. Antius thou shalt see, he made reply, ere long, and he can speak, nor is in chains. Us to the depth of all iniquity he shall let down. The one thou'dst see remains far off, like this one bound and like in make, but in his face far more of fierceness reigns. Never when earth most terribly did quake shook any tower so much as what all o'er and suddenly did Ephialtes shake. Terror of death possessed me more and more. The fear alone had served my turn indeed, but that I marked the ligatures he wore. Then did we somewhat further on proceed, reaching Antius, who for good 5 his head not counted, from the pit was freed. O thou who from the fortune-haunted dell, where Scipio of glory was made heir when with his host to flight turned Hannibal 1,000 lions didst for booty bear away, and who, hadst thou but joined the host and like thy brethren fought, some even aver the victory to earth's sons had not been lost. Lower us now, nor disobliging show to where Cocytus fettered is by frost. To Tydeus nor to Typhon make us go, to grant what here is longed for he hath power. Cease them to curl thy snout, but bend thee low. He can for wage thy name on earth restore, he lives, and still expecteth to live long, if grace recall him not before his hour. So spake my master. Then his hands he swung downward and seized my leader in all haste, hands in whose grip even Hercules once was wrung. And Virgil, when he felt them round him cast, said, that I may embrace thee, hither tend, and in one bundle with him made me fast. And as to him that under Carason stands on the side it leans to, while clouds fly counter its slope, the tower appears to bend, even so to me who stood attentive by Antius seemed to stoop, and I, dismayed, had gladly sought another road to try. But us in the abyss he gently laid, where Lucifer and Judas gulfed remain, nor to it thus bent downward long time stayed, but like a ship's mast raised himself again. Footnotes: Achilles, the rust upon his lance, had virtue to heal the wound. From that sad valley, leaving the 10th and last Balja, they climb the inner bank of it and approach the 9th and last circle, which consists of the pit of the Inferno. Roland, Charles the Great, on his march north after defeating the Saracens at Saragossa, left Roland to bring up his rear guard. The enemy fell on this in superior strength, and slew the Christians almost to a man. Then Roland, mortally wounded, sat down under a tree in Roncesvalles and blew upon his famous horn, a blast so loud that it was heard by Charles at a distance of several miles. The chansons de geste were familiarly known to Italians of all classes. Then tenderly, etc. The wound inflicted by his reproof has been already healed, but Virgil still behaves to Dante with more than his wonted gentleness. He will have him assured of his sympathy now that they are about to descend into the lowest depth of all wickedness. Monteregani, a fortress about 6 miles from Siena, of which ample ruins still exist. It had no central keep, but 12 towers rose from its circular wall like spikes from the rim of a coronet. They had been added by the Sienese in 1260, and so were comparatively new in Dante's time as the towers stood round Monteregani, so the giants at regular intervals stand round the central pit. They have their foothold within the enclosing mound, and thus, to one looking at them from without, they are hidden by it up to their middle. As the embodiment of superhuman impious strength and pride they stand for warders of the utmost reach of hell. St. Peter's cone, the great pine cone of bronze, supposed to have originally crowned the mausoleum of Hadrian, lay in Dante's time in the forecourt of St. Peter's. When the new church was built, it was removed to the gardens of the Vatican, where it still remains. Its size, it will be seen, is of importance as helping us to a notion of the stature of the giants. And, though the accounts of its height are strangely at variance with one another, I think the measurement made specially for philoliths may be accepted as substantially correct. According to that, the cone is 10 palms long, about 6 feet. Allowing something for the neck, down to where a man clasps his cloak, line 66, and taking the 30 palms as 18 feet, we get 26 feet or so for half his height. The giants vary in bulk, whether they do so in height is not clear. We cannot be far mistaken if we assume them to stand from 50 to 60 feet high. Virgil and Dante must throw their heads well back to look up into the giant's face, and Virgil must raise his voice as he speaks with regard to the height of the cone. It may be remarked that Murray's Handbook for Rome makes it 11 feet high. Gselfel's 2.5 meters, or 8 feet and 3 inches. It is so placed as to be difficult of measurement. 3 Frisians, 3 very tall men, as Dante took Frisians to be, if standing one on the head of the other would not have reached his hair. Rayful, etc. These words, like the opening line of the 7th canto, have, to no result, greatly exercised the ingenuity of scholars. From what follows it is clear that Dante meant them to be meaningless. Part of Nimrod's punishment is that he who brought about the confusion of tongues is now left with a language all to himself. It seems strange that commentators should have exhausted themselves in searching for a sense in words specially invented to have none in his divulge. L. I. 7. Dante enlarges upon the confusion of tongues, and speaks of the Tower of Babel as having been begun by men on the persuasion of a giant. Ephialtes, one of the giants who in the war with the gods piled Ossa on Pelion. Antaeus is to be asked to lift them over the wall, because, unlike Nimrod, he can understand what is said to him, and, unlike Ephialtes, is not bound. Antaeus is free-handed because he took no part in the war with the gods. The one thou'dst see, Briareus. Virgil here gives Dante to know what is the truth about Briareus, see line 97, etc. He is not, as he was fabled, a monster with 100 hands, but is like Ephialtes, only fiercer to see. Hearing himself thus made light of, Ephialtes trembles with anger, like a tower rocking in an earthquake. 5 Ls make about 30 palms, so that Antaeus is of the same stature as that assigned to Nimrod at line 65. This supports the view that the huger of line 84 may apply to breadth rather than to height. The fortune-haunted dell, the valley of the Bagrata near Utica, where Scipio defeated Hannibal and won the surname of Africanus. The giant Antaeus had, according to the legend, lived in that neighborhood, with the flesh of lions for his food and his dwelling in a cave. He was son of the earth, and could not be vanquished so long as he was able to touch the ground, and thus ere Hercules could give him a mortal hug he needed to swing him aloft. In the Monarchia, Roman 2. 10, Dante refers to the combat between Hercules and Antaeus as an instance of the wager of battle corresponding to that between David and Goliath. Lucan's Pharsalia, a favorite authority with Dante, supplies him with these references to Scipio and Antaeus. Cocytus, the frozen lake fed by the waters of Phlegethon, see Canto 14, at the end. Tydeus, etc., these were other giants, stated by Lucan to be less strong than Antaeus. This introduction of their names is therefore a piece of flattery to the monster. A light contemptuous turn is given by Virgil to his flattery when in the following sentence he bids Antaeus not curl his snout, but at once comply with the demand for aid. There is something genuinely Italian in the picture given of the giants in this canto, as of creatures whose intellect bears no proportion to their bulk and brute strength. Mighty hunters like Nimrod, skilled in sounding the horn but feeble in reasoned speech, Frisians with great thews and long of limb, and German men-at-arms who traded in their rude valor. To the subtle Florentine in whom the ferment of the Renaissance was beginning to work were all specimens of nature's handicraft that had better have been left unmade, were it not that wiser people could use them as tools. Caracenda, a tower still standing in Bologna, built at the beginning of the 12th century, and, like many others of its kind in the city, erected not for strength, but merely in order to dignify the family to whom it belonged. By way of further distinction to their owners, some of these towers were so constructed as to lean from the perpendicular. Caracenda, like its taller neighbor the Asinelli, still supplies a striking feature to the near and distant views of Bologna. What is left of it hangs for more than 2 yards off the plumb. In the half-century after Dante's time, it had, according to Benvenuto, lost something of its height. It would therefore, as the poet saw it, seem to be bending down even more than it now does to anyone standing under it on the side it slopes to, when a cloud is drifting over it in the other direction. Canto 32. Had I sonorous rough rhymes at command, such as would suit the cavern terrible rooted on which all the other ramparts stand, the sap of fancies which within me swell closer I'd press. But since I have not these, with some misgiving I go on to tell. For 'tis no task to play with as you please, of all the world the bottom to portray, nor one that with a baby speech agrees. But let those ladies help me with my lay, who helped Amphion walls round Thebes to pile, and faithful to the facts my words shall stay. O bove all creatures wretched, for whose vile abode 'tis hard to find a language fit, as sheep or goats ye had been happier. While we still were standing in the murky pit beneath the giant's feet set far below, and at the high wall I was staring yet, when this I heard. Heed to thy steps bestow, lest haply by thy souls the heads be spurned of wretched brothers wearied in their woe. Before me, as on hearing this I turned, beneath my feet a frozen lake, its skies rather of glass than water, I discerned. In all its course on Austrian Danube lies no vale in time of winter near so thick, nor on the dawn beneath its frigid skies, as this was here, on which if Tabernic or Mount Pietrapana should alight not even the edge would answer with a creak. And as the croaking frog holds well in sight its muzzle from the pool, what time of year the peasant girl of gleaning dreams at night? The morning shades in ice were covered here, seen livid up to where we blush with shame. In stork-like music their teeth chattering were. With downcast face stood every one of them, to cold from every mouth, and to despair from every eye an ample witness came, and having somewhat gazed around me their eye to my feet looked down, and saw two pressed so close together, tangled was their hair. Say, who are you with breast thus strained to breast? I asked, where on their necks they backward bent, and when their upturned faces lay at rest their eyes, which earlier were but moistened, sent tears o'er their eyelids. These the frost congealed and fettered fast before they further went, plank set to plank no rivet ever held more firmly. Wherefore, goat-like, either ghost butted the other, so their wrath prevailed, and one who wanted both ears, which the frost had bitten off, with face still downward thrown asked, why with us art thou so long engrossed? If who that couple are thou'dst have made known the vale down which by Senzio's floods decline was once their father Albert's and their own, one body bore them. Search the whole malign Caena, and thou shalt not any see more worthy to be fixed in gelatine. Not he whose breast and shadow equally were by one thrust of Arthur's lance pierced through, nor yet Focaccia, nor the one that me with his head hampers, blocking out my view, whose name was Sassal Mascheroni. Well thou must him know if thou art Tuscan too. And that thou needst not make me further tell I'm Camishan de Pazzi, and Carlin I weary for, whose guilt shall mine excel. A thousand faces saw I dog-like grin, frost-bound, whence I, as now, shall always shake whenever sight of frozen pools I win. While to the centre we our way did make to which all things converging gravitate, and me that chill eternal cause to quake, whether by fortune, providence, or fate, I know not, but as 'mong the heads I when I kicked one full in the face, who therefore straight, why trample on me? Snarled and made lament, unless thou calm'st to heap the vengeance high for Monteperty, why so virulent gainst me? I said, await me here till I by him, O master, shall be cleared of doubt, then let my pace thy will be guided by. My guide delayed, and I to him spake out, while he continued uttering curses shrill. Say, what art thou at others thus to shout? But who art thou that goest at thy will through Antenora, trampling on the face of others? 'Twere too much if thou wert still in life. I live, and it may help thy case, was my reply. If thou renown wouldst gain, should I thy name upon my tablets place. And he, I for the opposite am fain. Depart thou hence, nor work me further duel, within this swamp thou flatterest all in vain. Then I began him by the scalp to pull, and thou must tell how thou art called, I said, or soon thy hair will not be plentiful. And he, though every hair thou from me shred I will not tell thee, nor my face turn round, no, though 1,000 times thou spurn my head. His locks ere this about my fist were wound, and many a tuft I tore, while dog-like wails burst from him, and his eyes still sought the ground, then called another. Bacca, what now ails? Is't not enough thy teeth go chattering there, but thou must bark. What devil thee assails? Ah, now, said I, thou needst not aught declare, accursed traitor, and true news of thee to thy disgrace I to the world will bear. Begone, tell what thou wilt, he answered me. But if thou issue hence, not silent keep of him whose tongue but lately wagged so free. He for the Frenchman's money here doth weep. Him of Dura saw I, mayst thou tell, where sinners shiver in the frozen deep. Shouldst thou be asked who else within it dwell, thou hast the Beccaria at thy side, across whose neck the knife at Florence fell. John Soldenieri may be yonder spied with Gainelin, and Tribaldel who through fiends' gates, when slept the city wide. Him had we left, our journey to pursue, when frozen in a hole a pair I saw, one's head like the other's hat showed to the view, and, as their bred men hunger-driven gnaw, the uppermost tore fiercely at his mate where nape and brainpan to a junction draw. No worse by Titius in his scornful hate, were Menelaus' temples gnawed and hacked than skull, and all were torn by him irate. O thou who provest by such bestial act hatred of him who by thy teeth is chewed, declare thy motive, said I. On this pact that if with reason thou with him hast feud, knowing your names and manner of his crime I in the world to thee will make it good, if what I speak withdraw not ere the time. Footnotes. A baby speech. A tongue that cries mama and papa, for his present purpose, he complains, he has not in Italian an adequate supply of rough high-sounding rhymes, but at least he will use only the best words that can be found. In another work, divulg. L. Roman 2. 7, he instances mama and babbo as words of a kind to be avoided by all who would write nobly in Italian. Amphion, who with his music charmed rocks from the mountain and heaped them in order for walls to Thebes. The giant's feet, Antaeus. A bank slopes from where the giants stand inside the wall down to the pit which is filled with the frozen Cocytus. This is the 9th and inmost circle, and is divided into 4 concentric rings. Caina, Antenora, Ptolemea, and Judaea where traitors of different kinds are punished. Thy steps, Dante alone is addressed, the speaker having seen him set heavily down upon the ice by Antaeus. A frozen lake, Cocytus, see Inf, Roman 14, 119. Tabernic, it is not certain what mountain is here meant, probably Yavornik near Adelsberg in Carniola. It is mentioned, not for its size, but the harshness of its name. Pietrapana, a mountain between Modena and Lucca, visible from Pisa, Petra Puana. Time of year, at harvest time, when in the warm summer nights the wearied gleaner dreams of her day's work. To where we blush, the bodies of the shades are seen buried in the clear glassy ice, out of which their heads and necks stand free as much as shows shame, that is, blushes. With breast, etc., as could be seen through the clear ice. Fettered fast, binding up their eyes. In the punishment of traitors is symbolized the hardness and coldness of their hearts to all the claims of blood, country, or friendship. Their father Alberts, Albert of the family of the Counts Alberti, lord of the upper valley of the Bicenzio, near Florence. His sons, Alexander and Napoleon, slew one another in a quarrel regarding their inheritance. Caina, the outer ring of the 9th circle, and that in which are punished those treacherous to their kindred here, a place is reserved for Ginciato Malatesta, the husband of Francesca, Inf. v. 107. Arthur's lance, Mordred, natural son of King Arthur, was slain by him in battle as a rebel and traitor. And the history says that after the lance-thrust Gerflit plainly saw a ray of the sun pass through the hole of the wound, Lancelot du Lac. Focaccia, a member of the Pistes family of Cancellieri, in whose domestic feuds the parties of whites and blacks took rise. He assassinated one of his relatives and cut off the hand of another. Sassal Mascheroni, of the Florentine family of the Tosci, he murdered his nephew, of whom by some accounts he was the guardian. For this crime he was punished by being rolled through the streets of Florence in a cask and then beheaded. Every Tuscan would be familiar with the story of such a punishment. Camician du Pazzi, To distinguish the Pazzi to whom Camitian belonged from the Pazzi of Florence, they were called the Pazzi of Valdarno, where their possessions lay. Like his fellow traders, he had slain a kinsman. Carlin, also one of the Pazzi of Valdarno. Like all the spirits in this circle, Camitian is eager to betray the treachery of others, and prophesies the guilt of his still living relative, which is to cast his own villainy into the shade. In 1302 or 1303, Carlino held the castle of Piano de Trevine in Valdarno, where many of the exiled whites of Florence had taken refuge, and for a bribe he betrayed it to the enemy. The center, the bottom of Inferno, is the center of the earth, and, on the system of Ptolemy, the central point of the universe. Monteperti, c. Inf. x86. The speaker is Bacca, of the great Florentine family of the Abbati, who served as one of the Florentine cavaliers at Monteperti. When the enemy was charging towards the standard of the Republican cavalry, Bacca aimed a blow at the arm of the knight who bore it and cut off his hand. The sudden fall of the flag disheartened the Florentines and in great measure contributed to the defeat. Cleared of doubt, the mention of Monteperti in this place of traders suggests to Dante the thought of Bacca. He would fain be sure as to whether he has the traitor at his feet. Monteperti was never very far from the thoughts of the Florentine of that day. It is never out of Bacca's mind. Antenora, the second ring of the ninth circle, where traitors to their country are punished, named after Antenor the Trojan prince who, according to the belief of the Middle Ages, betrayed his native city to the Greeks. Should I thy name, etc., should I put thy name among the other notes? It is the last time that Dante is to offer such a bribe, and here the offer is most probably ironical. Not silent keep, etc. Like all the other traitors, Bacca finds his only pleasure in betraying his neighbors. The Frenchman's money, he who had betrayed the name of Bacca was Buoso of Dura, one of the Ghibelline chiefs of Cremona. When Guy of Montfort was leading an army across Lombardy to recruit Charles of Anjou in his war against Manfred in 1265 Inf. Roman 28, 16 and Perg. Roman 3. Buoso, who had been left to guard the passage of the Oglio, took a bribe to let the French army pass. Beccaria, Tesoro of the Pavian family Beccaria, abbot of Vallombrosa, and legate in Florence of Pope Alexander Roman IV. He was accused of conspiring against the Commonwealth along with the exiled Ghibellines, 1258. All Europe was shocked to hear that a great churchman had been tortured and beheaded by the Florentines. The city was placed under papal interdict, proclaimed by the Archbishop of Pisa from the Tower of S. Pietro in Vincoli at Rome. Villani seems to think the abbot was innocent of the charge brought against him, Cron, Roman 6, 65, but he always leans to the indulgent view when a priest is concerned. Soldinieri, deserted from the Florentine Ghibellines after the defeat of Manfred. Gainelin, whose treacherous counsel led to the defeat of Roland at Roncesvalles. Tribaldello, a noble of Faenza, who, as one account says, to revenge himself for the loss of a pig, sent a cast of the key of the city gate to John of Appia, then prowling about Romagna in the interest of the French Pope, Martin Roman IV. He was slain at the Battle of Forli in 1282 Inf. Roman 27, 43. Frozen in a hole, etc. The two are the Count Ugolino and the Archbishop Roger. Titius, one of the 7 against Thebes, who, having been mortally wounded by Menalippus the Theban, whom he slew, got his friends to bring him the head of his foe and gnawed at it with his teeth. Dante found the incident in his favorite author Statius, Theb, Roman 8. I in the world, etc. Dante has learned from Bacca that the prospect of having their memory refreshed on earth has no charm for the sinners met with here. The bribe he offers is that of loading the name of a foe with ignominy, but only if from the tale it shall be plain that the ignominy is deserved. Canto 33. His mouth uplifting from the savage feast, the sinner rubbed and wiped it free of gore on the hair of the head he from behind laid waste, and then began. Thou'dst have me wake once more a desperate grief, of which to think alone, ere I have spoken, wrings me to the core. But if my words shall be as seed that sown may fructify unto the traitor's shame, whom thus I gnaw, I mingle speech and groan. Of how thou earnest hither or thy name I nothing know, but that a Florentine in very sooth thou art, thy words proclaim. Thou then must know I was Count Ugolin, the Archbishop Roger he. Now hearken well why I prove such a neighbor. How in fine, and flowing from his ill designs, it fell that I, confiding in his words, was caught then done to death, were waste of time to tell. But that of which as yet thou heardest not is how the death was cruel which I met. Hearken and judge if wrong to me he wrought. Scant window in the mew whose epithet of famine came from me its resident, and cooped in which shall many languish yet, had shown me through its slit how there were spent full many moons, ere that bad dream I dreamed one of my future was the curtain rent. Lord of the hunt and master this one seemed, chasing the wolf and wolf cubs on the height by which from Pisan eyes is Luca hemmed. With famished hounds well trained and swift of flight, Lanfranchi and Gualandi in the van, and Sismond he had set. Within my sight both sire and sons nor long the chase began to grow, so seemed it, weary as they fled, then through their flanks fangs sharp and eager ran. When I awoke before the morning spread, I heard my sons all weeping in their sleep, for they were with me and they asked for bread. Ah, cruel if thou canst from pity keep at the bare thought of what my heart fork knew, and if thou weep'st not, what could make thee weep? Now were they wake, and near the moment drew at which 'twas used to bring us our repast, but each was fearful lest his dream came true, and then I heard the under gate made fast of the horrible tower, and thereupon I gazed in my sons' faces, silent and aghast. I did not weep, for I to stone was dazed, they wept, and darling Anselm me besought, "What ails thee, father? Wherefore thus amazed?" And yet I did not weep, and answered not the whole day, and that night made answer none, till on the world another sun shone out. Soon as a feeble ray of light had won into our doleful prison, made aware of the four faces featured like my own, both of my hands I bit at in despair. And they, imagining that I was fain to eat, arose before me with the prayer, "O Father, 'twere for us an easier pain if thou wouldst eat us. Thou didst us array in this poor flesh, unclothe us now again." I calmed me, not to swell their woe. That day and the next day no single word we said. Ah, pitiless earth that didst unyawning stay, when we had reached the fourth day, Gatto, spread out at my feet, fell prone and made demand, "Why, O my father, offering us no aid, there died he. Plain as I before thee stand, I saw the three as one by one they failed, the fifth day and the sixth. Then with my hand, blind now, I groped for each of them, and wailed on them for 2 days after they were gone." Famine at last, more strong than grief, prevailed. When he had uttered this, his eyes all thrown awry, upon the hapless skull he fell with teeth that, dog-like, rasped upon the bone. Ah, Pisa! Byword of the folk that dwell in the sweet country where the sea doth sound, since slow thy neighbors to reward thee well, let now Gorgona and Caprea mound themselves where Arno with the sea is blent, till every one within thy walls be drowned. For though report of Ugolino went that he betrayed thy castles, thou didst wrong thus cruelly his children to torment. These were not guilty, for they were but young thou modern Thebes, Brigada and young Hugh, and the other twain of whom above 'tis sung. We onward pass to where another crew of shades the thick-ribbed ice doth fettered keep, their heads not downward these, but backward through. Their very weeping will not let them weep, and grief, encountering barriers at their eyes, swells, flowing inward, their affliction deep, for the first tears that issue crystallize, and fill, like visor fashioned out of glass, the hollow cup o'er which the eyebrows rise. And though as twere a callus, now my face by reason of the frost was wholly grown benumbed and dead to feeling, I could trace, so it appeared, a breeze against it blown, and asked, "O master, whence comes this? So low as where we are is any vapor known?" And he replied, "Thou ere long while shalt go where touching this thine eye shall answer true, discovering that which makes the wind to blow." Then from the cold crust one of that sad crew demanded loud, "Spirits, for whom they hold the inmost room, so truculent were you, back from my face let these hard veils be rolled, that I may vent the woe which chokes my heart, ere tears again solidify with cold." And I to him, "First tell me who thou art if thou'dst have help, then if I help not quick to the bottom of the ice let me depart." He answered, "I am Friar Alberic, he of the fruit grown in the orchard fell, and here am I repaid with date for fig." "Ah," said I to him, "art thou dead as well? How now my body fares?" He answered me, "Up in the world, I have no skill to tell, for Ptolemea has this quality, the soul oft plunges hither to its place ere it has been by Atropos set free. And that more willingly from off my face thou mayst remove the glassy tears. No, soon as ever any soul of man betrays as I betrayed, the body once his own a demon takes and governs, until all the span allotted for his life be run. Into this tank headlong the soul doth fall, and on the earth his body yet may show whose shade behind me wintry frosts enthrall. But thou canst tell, if newly come below, it is Sir Brancadoria, and complete is many a year since he was fettered so." "It seems," I answered, That thou wouldst me cheat for Brancadoria never can have died. He sleeps, puts clothes on, swallows drink and meat. Or ere to the tenacious pitchy tide which boils in Malebranche's moat had come the shade of Michael Zanche, he replied. That soul had left a devil in its room within its body. Of his kinsmen one treacherous with him experienced equal doom. But stretch thy hand and be its work begun of setting free mine eyes. This did not I. 'Twas highest courtesy to yield him none. Ah, Genoese, strange to morality, ye men infected with all sorts of sin, out of the world 'tis time that ye should die. Here, to Romagna's blackest soul akin, I chanced on one of you. For doing ill his soul o'erwhelmed Cocytus floods within, though in the flesh he seems surviving still. Note on the Count Ugolino. Ugolino della Gherardesca, Count of Donoratico, a wealthy noble and a man fertile in political resource, was deeply engaged in the affairs of Pisa at a critical period of her history. He was born in the first half of the 13th century. By giving one of his daughters in marriage to the head of the Visconti of Pisanot, to be confounded with those of Milan, he came under the suspicion of being Guelph in his sympathies. The general opinion of Pisa being then, as it always had been, strongly Ghibelline. When driven into exile, as he was along with the Visconti, he improved the occasion by entering into close relations with the leading Guelphs of Tuscany. And in 1278, a free return for him to Pisa was made by them a condition of peace with that city. He commanded one of the divisions of the Pisan fleet at the disastrous Battle of Meloria in 1284, when Genoa wrested from her rival the supremacy of the western Mediterranean, and carried thousands of Pisan citizens into a captivity which lasted many years. Isolated from her Ghibelline allies, and for the time almost sunk in despair, the city called him to the government with well-nigh dictatorial powers, and by dint of crafty negotiations in detail with the members of the league formed against Pisa, helped as was believed by lavish bribery, he had the glory of saving the Commonwealth from destruction, though he could not wholly save it from loss. This was in 1285. He soon came to be suspected of being in a secret alliance with Florence and of being lukewarm in the negotiations for the return of the prisoners in Genoa, all with a view to depress the Ghibelline element in the city that he might establish himself as an absolute tyrant with the greater ease. In order still further to strengthen his position, he entered into a family compact with his Guelph grandson Nino, Perg, Roman 8. 53, now at the head of the Visconti. But without the support of the people, it was impossible for him to hold his ground against the Ghibelline nobles, who resented the arrogance of his manners and were embittered by the loss of their own share in the government. And these contrived that month by month the charges of treachery brought against him should increase in virulence. He had, by deserting his post, caused the defeat at Meloria, it was said, and had bribed the other Tuscan cities to favor him by ceding to them distant Pisan strongholds. His fate was sealed when, having quarreled with his grandson Nino, he sought alliance with the Archbishop Roger, who now led the Ghibelline opposition. With Ugo's connivance, an onslaught was planned upon the Guelphs. To preserve an appearance of impartiality, he left the city for a neighboring villa. On returning to enjoy his riddance from a rival, he was invited to a conference, at which he resisted a proposal that he should admit partners with him in the government. On this, the archbishop's party raised the cry of treachery. The bells rang out for a street battle in which he was worsted, and with his sons he had to take refuge in the palace of the people. There he stood a short siege against the Ghibelline families and the angry mob, and in the same palace he was kept prisoner for 20 days. Then, with his sons and grandsons, he was carried in chains to the tower of the Gualandi, which stood where 7 ways met in the heart of Pisa. This was in July 1288. The imprisonment lasted for months, and seems to have been thus prolonged with the view of extorting a heavy ransom. It was only in the following March that the archbishop ordered his victims to be starved to death, for, being a churchman, says one account, he would not shed blood. Not even a confessor was allowed to Ugo and his sons. After the door of the tower had been kept closed for 8 days, it was opened, and the corpses, still fettered, were huddled into a tomb in the Franciscan church. The original authorities are far from being agreed as to the details of Ugo's overthrow and death. For the matter of this note, I am chiefly indebted to the careful epitome of the Pisan history of that time by Philalethes in his note on this canto, Gottlich Commodi. Footnotes. The sinner, Count Ugolino, see note at the end of the canto. Mingle speech, etc. A comparison of these words with those of Francesca Inf. V 124 will show the difference in moral tone between the second circle of Inferno and the ninth. A Florentine, so Farinata Inf. X25, recognizes Dante by his Florentine speech. The words heard by Ugo are those at Roman 32, 133. The Archbishop Roger, Ruggieri, of the Tuscan family of the Ubaldini, to which the Cardinal of Inf. X 120 also belonged. Towards the end of his life, he was summoned to Rome to give an account of his evil deeds, and on his refusal to go was declared a rebel to the church. Ugolino was a traitor to his country. Roger, having entered into some sort of alliance with Ugolino, was a traitor to him. This has led some to suppose that while Ugolino is in Antinora, he is so close to the edge of it as to be able to reach the head of Roger, who, as a traitor to his friend, is fixed in Ptolemea. Against this view is the fact that they are described as being in the same hole, Roman 32, 125, and also that in Ptolemea the shades are set with head thrown back, and with only the face appearing above the ice, while Ugo is described as biting his foe at where the skull joins the nape. From line 91, it is clear that Ptolemea lay further on than where Roger is. Like Ugo, he is therefore here as a traitor to his country. Were waste, etc. For Dante knows it already, all Tuscany being familiar with the story of Ugo's fate. Whose epithet of famine? It was called the Tower of Famine. Its site is now built over. Beauty, the old Pisan commentator of Dante, says it was called the Mew because the eagles of the Republic were kept in it at molting time. But this may have been an afterthought to give local truth to Dante's verse, which it does at the expense of the poetry. Many moons, the imprisonment having already lasted for 8 months. The height, etc. Lucca is about 12 miles from Pisa, Mount Giuliano rising between them. Lanfranchi, etc. In the dream, these, the chief Ghibelline families of Pisa, are the huntsmen, Roger being master of the hunt, and the populace the hounds. Ugo and his sons and grandsons are the wolf and wolf cubs. In Ugo's dream of himself as a wolf, there may be an allusion to his having engaged in the Guelph interest. My sons, according to Dante, taken literally, 4 of Ugo were imprisoned with him. It would have hampered him to explain that 2 were grandsons Anselmuccio and Nino, called the Brigata at line 89, grandsons by their mother of King Enzo, natural son of Frederick Roman II. The sons being Gatto and Agucciani, the latter Ugo's youngest son. Each was fearful, etc. All the sons had been troubled by dreams of famine. Had their rations been already reduced? The undergate, etc. The word translated made fast, chiaver, may signify either to nail up or to lock. The commentators and chroniclers differ as to whether the door was locked, nailed, or built up. I would suggest that the lower part of the tower was occupied by a guard, and that the captives had not been used to hear the main door locked. Now, when they hear the great key creaking in the lock, they know that the tower is deserted. The 4 faces, etc. Despairing like his own, or possibly that, wasted by famine, the faces of the young men had become liker than ever to Ugo's own time-worn face. Famine, etc. This line, quite without reason, has been held to mean that Ugo was driven by hunger to eat the flesh of his children. The meaning is that, poignant though his grief was, it did not shorten his sufferings from famine. Where the sea, etc. Italy, sea being the Italian for yes, in his divulge. I8 Dante distinguishes the Latin languages French, Italian, etc. by their words of affirmation, and so terms Italian the language of sea. But Tuscany may here be meant, where, as a Tuscan commentator says, the sea is more sweetly pronounced than in any other part of Italy. In Canto 18. 61, the Bolognese are distinguished as the people who say Sipa. If Pisa be taken as being specially the opprobrium of Tuscany, the outburst against Genoa, at the close of the canto gains, in distinctness and force. Gorgona and Capria, islands not far from the mouth of the Arno. That he betrayed, etc. Dante seems here to throw doubt on the charge. At the height of her power, Pisa was possessed of many hundreds of fortified stations in Italy and scattered over the Mediterranean coasts. The charge was one easy to make and difficult to refute. It seems hard on Ugo that he should get the benefit of the doubt only after he has been, for poetical ends, buried raging in Cocytus. Modern Thebes. As Thebes was to the race of Cadmus, so was Pisa to that of Ugolino. Another crew, they are in Ptolemea, the third division of the circle, and that assigned to those treacherous to their friends, allies, or guests. Here only the faces of the shades are free of the ice. Is any vapor? Has the sun, so low down as this, any influence upon the temperature, producing vapors and wind? In Dante's time, wind was believed to be the exhalation of a vapor. To the bottom, etc. Dante is going there in any case, and his promise is nothing but a quibble. Friar Alberigo of the Manfredi, a gentleman of Finza, who late in life became one of the Merry Friars. See Inf. Roman 23, 103. In the course of a dispute with his relative Manfred, he got a hearty box on the ear from him. Feigning to have forgiven the insult, he invited Manfred with a youthful son to dinner in his house, having first arranged that when they had finished their meat, and he called for fruit, armed men should fall on his guests. The fruit of Friar Alberigo passed into a proverb. Here he is repaid with a date for a fig gets more than he bargained for. Ptolemea. This division is named from the Hebrew Ptolemy, who slew his relatives at a banquet, they being then his guests, 1 Macab, Romans 16. Atropos, the fate who cuts the thread of life and sets the soul free from the body. Brancadoria, a Genoese noble who in 1275 slew his father-in-law Michael Zanch Inf. Roman 22, 88, while the victim sat at table as his invited guest. This mention of Branca is of some value in helping to ascertain when the Inferno was finished. He was in imprisonment and exile for some time before, and up to 1310. In 1311, he was one of the citizens of Genoa hardiest in welcoming the Emperor Henry to their city. Impartial as Dante was, we can scarcely think that he would have loaded with infamy one who had done what he could to help the success of Henry, on whom all Dante's hopes were long set, and by their reception of whom on his descent into Italy he continued to judge his fellow countrymen. There is considerable reason to believe that the Inferno was published in 1309. This introduction of Branca helps to prove that at least it was published before 1311. If this was so, then Brancadoria lived long enough to read or hear that for 35 years his soul had been in Helot, is significant of the detestation in which Dante held any breach of hospitality, that it is as a treacherous host, and not as a treacherous kinsman, that Branca is punished in Ptolemea and not in Caina. Cast as the poet was on the hospitality of the world, any disloyalty to its obligations came home to him. For such disloyalty, he has invented one of the most appalling of the fierce retributions, with the vision of which he satisfied his craving for vengeance upon prosperous Senate. May be that the idea of this demon possession of the traitor is taken from the words. And after the sop, Satan entered into Judas. Of his kinsmen one, a cousin or nephew of Branca, was engaged with him in the murder of Michael Zanch. The vengeance came on them so speedily that their souls were plunged in Ptolemea ere Zanch breathed his last. To yield him none, Alberigo being so unworthy of courtesy. See note on 117. But another interpretation of the words has been suggested which saves Dante from the charge of cruelty and mean quibbling, namely, that he did not clear the ice from the sinner's eyes, because then he would have been seen to be a living man, one who could take back to the world the awful news that Alberigo's body was the dwelling place of a devil. Ah, Genoese, etc. The Genoese indeed held no good character. One of their annalists, under the date of 1293, describes the city as suffering from all kinds of crime. Romagna's blackest soul, Friar Alberigo. Canto 34. Vexilla regis prodent inferni towards where we are. Seek then with vision keen, my master bade, if trace of him thou spy. As when the exhalations dense have been, or when our hemisphere grows dark with night, a windmill from afar is sometimes seen, I seem to catch of such a structure sight, and then to scape the blast did backward draw behind my guide soul shelter in my plight. Now was I where I versify with awe the shades were wholly covered, and did show visible as in glass are bits of straw. Some stood upright, and some were lying low, some with head topmost, others with their feet, and some with face to feet bent like a bow. But we kept going on till it seemed meet unto my master that I should behold the creature once of countenance so sweet. He stepped aside and stopped me as he told, Lo, Dis, and lo, we are arrived at last where thou must nerve thee and must make thee bold. How I hereon stood shivering and aghast, demand not, reader, This eye cannot write, so much the fact all reach of words surpassed. I was not dead, yet living was not quite. Think for thyself, if gifted with the power, what life and death denied me was my plight. Of that tormented realm, the emperor out of the ice stood free to middle breast, and me a giant less would overtower than would his arm a giant. By such test, judge then what bulk the whole of him must show, of true proportion with such limb possessed, if he was fair of old as hideous now, and yet his brows against his maker raised, meetly from him doth all affliction flow. Oh, how it made me horribly amazed when on his head I saw 3 faces grew. The one vermilion which straight forward gazed, and joining on to it were other 2, one rising up from either shoulder bone, till to a junction on the crest they drew. Twixt white and yellow seemed the right hand one, the left resembled them whose country lies where vallewards the floods of Nile flow down. Beneath each face 2 mighty wings did rise, such as this bird tremendous might demand. Sails of sea ships ne'er saw I of such size. Not feathered were they, but in style were planned like a bat's wing. By them a threefold breeze for still he flapped them evermore was fanned, and through its depths Cocytus caused to freeze. Down 3 chins tears for ever made descent from his 6 eyes, and red foam mixed with these. In every mouth there was a sinner rent by teeth that shred him as a heckle would, thus 3 at once compelled he to lament. To the one in front, 'twas little to be chewed compared with being clawed and clawed again, till his backbone of skin was sometimes nude. The soul up yonder in the greater pain is Judas Iscariot with his head among the teeth, my master said, while outward strain his legs. Of the 2 whose heads are downward hung, Brutus is from the black jowl pendulous, see how he writhes, yet never wags his tongue. The other, great of thew, is Cassius. But night is rising and we must be gone, for everything hath now been seen by us. Then, as he bade, I to his neck held on while he the time and place of vantage chose, and when the wings enough were open thrown, he grasped the shaggy ribs and clutched them close. And so from tuft to tuft, he downward went between the tangled hair and crust which froze. We to the bulging haunch had made descent to where the hip joint lies in it, and then my guide, with painful twist and violent, turned round his head to where his feet had been, and like a climber closely clutched the hair. I thought to hell that we returned again. Hold fast to me, it needs by such a stair, panting, my leader said, like man Fordon, that we from all that wretchedness repair. Right through a hole in a rock when he had won, the edge of it he gave me for a seat, and deftly then to join me clambered on. I raised mine eyes, expecting they would meet with Lucifer as I beheld him last, but saw instead his upturned legs and feet. If in perplexity I then was cast, let ignorant people think who do not see what point it was that I had lately passed. Rise to thy feet, my master said to me, the way is long and rugged the ascent, and at mid-tierce the sun must almost be. 'Twas not as if on palace floors we went, a dungeon fresh from nature's hand was this, rough underfoot, and of light indigent. Or ever I escape from the abyss, O master, said I, standing now upright, correct in few words where I think amiss, where lies the ice? How hold we him in sight set upside down? The sun, how had it skill in so short while to pass to morn from night? And he, in fancy thou art standing, still on yon side of the centre, where I caught the vile worm's hair which through the world doth drill. There wast thou while our downward course I wrought, but when I turned, the centre was passed by which by all weights from every point is sought. And now thou standest, neath the other sky opposed to that which vaults the great dry ground, and neath whose summit there did whilom die the man whose birth and life were sinless found. Thy feet are firm upon the little sphere, on the side answering to Judica's round. 'Tis evening yonder when 'tis morning here, and he whose tufts our ladder rungs supplied. Fixed as he was continues to appear. Headlong from heaven he fell upon this side, where on the land, protuberant here before for fear of him did in the ocean hide, and neath our sky emerged. Land, as of yore still on this side, perhaps that it might shun his fall, heaved up, and filled this depth no more. From Beelzebub still widening up and on, far stretching as the sepulchre, extends a region not beheld, but only known by murmur of a brook which through it wends, declining by a channel eaten through the flinty rock, and gently it descends. My guide and I, our journey to pursue to the bright world, upon this road concealed made entrance, and no thought of resting knew. He first, I second, still ascending held our way until the fair celestial train was through an opening round to me revealed, and, issuing thence, we saw the stars again. Footnotes: Vexilla, etc., the banners of the King of Hell advance. The words are adapted from a hymn of the cross used in Holy Week, and they prepare us to find in Lucifer the opponent of the emperor who reigns on high, Inf. I 124. It is somewhat odd that Dante should have put a Christian hymn into Virgil's mouth. Now was I where? In the fourth and inner division or ring of the ninth circle. Here are punished those guilty of treachery to their lawful lords or to their benefactors. From Judas Iscariot, the arch-traitor, it takes the name of Judeca. Some stood, etc. It has been sought to distinguish the degrees of treachery of the shades by means of the various attitudes assigned to them. But it is difficult to make more out of it than that some are suffering more than others. All of them are the worst of traitors, hard-hearted and cold-hearted, and now they are quite frozen in the ice, sealed up even from the poor relief of intercourse with their fellow sinners. The creature once, etc. Lucifer, guilty of treachery against the highest, at Purg, Roman 12:25 described as created noble beyond all other creatures. Virgil calls him Dis, the name used by him for Pluto in the Aeneid, and the name from which that of the city of unbelief is taken Inf. Roman 8:68. Judge then what bulk. The arm of Lucifer was as much longer than the stature of one of the giants as a giant was taller than Dante. We have seen Inf. Roman 31:58 that the giants were more than 50 feet in height, 9 times the stature of a man. If a man's arm be taken as a third of his stature, then Satan is 27 times as tall as a giant, that is, he is 1,400 feet or so. For a fourth of this, or nearly so from the middle of the breast upwards he stands out of the ice, that is, some 350 feet. It seems almost too great a height for Dante's purpose, and yet on the calculations of some commentators, his stature is immensely greater, from 3,000 to 5,000 feet. 3 faces. By the 3 faces are represented the 3 quarters of the world from which the subjects of Lucifer are drawn, vermilion or carnation standing for Europe, yellow for Asia, and black for Africa. Or the faces may symbolize attributes opposed to the wisdom, power, and love of the Trinity Inf. Roman 3:5. See also note on line 1. A bat's wing, which flutters and flaps in dark and noisome places. The simile helps to bring more clearly before us the dim light and half-seen horrors of the Judeca. A heckle, or break, the instrument used to clear the fiber of flax from the woody substance mixed with it. Sometimes nude, we are to imagine that the frame of Judas is being forever renewed and forever mangled and torn. Cassius, it has been surmised that Dante here confounds the pale and lean Cassius, who was the friend of Brutus, with the L. Cassius, described as corpulent by Cicero in the 3rd Catiline oration. Brutus and Cassius are set with Judas in this, the deepest room of hell, because, as he was guilty of high treason against his divine master, so they were guilty of it against Julius Caesar, who, according to Dante, was chosen and ordained by God to found the Roman Empire. As the great rebel against the spiritual authority, Judas has allotted to him the fiercer pain. To understand the significance of this harsh treatment of the great republicans, it is necessary to bear in mind that Dante's devotion to the idea of the empire was part of his religion, and far surpassed in intensity all we can now well imagine. In the absence of a just and strong emperor, the divine government of the world seemed to him almost at a stand. Night is rising. It is Saturday evening, and 24 hours since they entered by the gate of Inferno. I thought to hell, etc. Virgil, holding on to Lucifer's hairy sides, descends the dark and narrow space between him and the ice as far as to his middle, which marks the center of the earth. Here he swings himself round so as to have his feet to the center as he emerges from the pit to the southern hemisphere. Dante now feels that he is being carried up, and, able to see nothing in the darkness, deems they are climbing back to the Inferno. Virgil's difficulty in turning himself round and climbing up the legs of Lucifer arises from his being then at the center, to which all weights tend from every part. Dante shared the erroneous belief of the time that things grew heavier the nearer they were to the center of the earth. His upturned legs, Lucifer's feet, are as far above where Virgil and Dante are as was his head above the level of the Judeca. What point, etc., the center of the earth? Dante here feigns to have been himself confused a fiction, which helps to fasten attention on the wonderful fact that if we could make our way through the earth, we should require at the center to reverse our posture. This was more of a wonder in Dante's time than now. Mid-tierce, The canonical day was divided into 4 parts, of which tierce was the first and began at sunrise. It is now about 7:30 in the morning. The night was beginning when they took their departure from the Judica. The day is now as far advanced in the southern hemisphere as they have spent time on the passage. The journey before them is long indeed, for they have to ascend to the surface of the earth. To mourn from night. Dante's knowledge of the time of day is wholly derived from what Virgil tells him. Since he began his descent into the Inferno, he has not seen the sun. 'Neath whose summit, Jerusalem is in the center of the northern hemisphere, an opinion founded perhaps on Ezekiel v5. Jerusalem I have set in the midst of the nations and countries round about her. In the Convito, Roman 3:5, we find Dante's belief regarding the distribution of land and sea clearly given. For those I write, for it is enough to know that the earth is fixed and does not move, and that, with the ocean, it is the center of the heavens. The heavens, as we see, are forever revolving around it as a center, and in these revolutions they must of necessity have 2 fixed poles. Of these one is visible to almost all the dry land of the earth, and that is our North Pole. The other, that is, the south, is out of sight of almost all the dry land. The man, the name of Christ, is not mentioned in the Inferno. Land, as of yore, etc. On the fall of Lucifer from the southern sky, all the dry land of that hemisphere fled before him under the ocean and took refuge in the other. That is, as much land emerged in the northern hemisphere as sank in the southern. But the ground in the direct line of his descent to the center of the earth heaped itself up into the Mount of Purgatory, the only dry land left in the southern hemisphere. The Inferno was then also hollowed out, and as Mount Calvary is exactly antipodal to Purgatory, we may understand that on the fall of the first rebels the Mount of Reconciliation for the human race, which is also that of purification, rose out of the very realms of darkness and sin. But, as Todeschini points out, the question here arises of whether the Inferno was not created before the earth. At Parad. Romans 7:124, the earth, with the air and fire and water, is described as corruptible and lasting short while. But the Inferno is to endure for aye, and was made before all that is not eternal. Inf. Roman 3:8. Beelzebub, called in the Gospel the prince of the devils. It may be worth mentioning here that Dante sees in Purgatory, Purg. Roman 8:99, a serpent which he says may be that which tempted Eve. The identification of the great tempter with Satan is a Miltonic, or at any rate a comparatively modern idea. The sepulchre, the Inferno, tomb of Satan and all the wicked. A brook, some make this to be the same as Lethe, one of the rivers of the earthly paradise. It certainly descends from the Mount of Purgatory. The stars, each of the 3 divisions of the comedy closes with the stars. These, as appears from Purg, I are the stars of dawn. It was after sunrise when they began their ascent to the surface of the earth, and so nearly 24 hours have been spent on the journey the time it took them to descend through Inferno. It is now the morning of Easter Sunday, that is, of the true anniversary of the resurrection, although not of the day observed that year by the Church. See Inf. Roman 21:112.